Hey everyone, how's it going? So yeah, as promised, I have some work stuff to do, so I won't be around. What I'm going to do, because I had lag issues the other day when I was trying to live stream my debate on Antifa, so my viewers that follow me on D Live and Twitch were unable to see that debate. What I did was I recorded it and put it up on my YouTube channel, Normal America with Rob Noor. Also, if you check out Normal America with Rob Noor, you can see my summary of the debate afterwards that occurred immediately after it. But unfortunately, that was the only place I was able to put this because my live stream audience on Twitch and D Live was unable to see it. So what I'm going to do is I am going to be away from keyboard. The debate's about 2 hours. What's up, Drone Tech? The debate's about 2 hours. I'm just going to play it live as a replay. If you're chatting to me during it, I won't be able to see it because I won't be here. I'll be at work. So I just have a couple minutes to lead an intro into it. There are potential problems with this. Like, for example, I might not get back to my computer until long after the debate's ended, or maybe there's technical issues or something like that. If that happens, I apologize. But I think this would be something that's interesting because, like, Drone Tech's another one who's very good as a content creator. He's on YouTube right now. Oftentimes, the news cycle's so fast, we'll forget that we covered a story 3 months ago, and then it makes headline news. Like, spoiler alert, I'll be doing a video on the Joe and Hunter Biden, Ukraine, China, Russia garbage, that shows how corrupt they are. But I was doing videos on that back during the impeachment saga. So maybe if I'm busy, one of the things I could do for content is just to replay those on my live stream so that a different audience that didn't get to see it at the time gets a chance to see what's going on. So just to lead into the debate, what happened, it was me saying that Antifa is a terror group. I didn't pick the topic. I fully admit throughout the course of this debate, I can't say that every single person that would call themselves Antifa is a terrorist, but I'm talking about how we understand the groups that operate now. There are terrorist groups, and that the best my opponent will be able to argue is there could hypothetically be some Antifa groups that aren't terrorists, but those aren't the ones we're really talking about, and I will still win the point that these Antifa groups that we see acting in places like Portland, New York City, Atlanta, D.C., other places like that clearly are a terrorist group. It gets heated because I feel that I was interrupted a lot throughout the debate, and then I respond in kind, which I understand the criticism that maybe I should be more level-headed. That's probably a fair criticism, and it's something that I'll try to do better next time. And someone on Periscope disagrees with me. They says that Antifa is not a terror group. So all I can say is watch the debate, and maybe I'll talk about it some more tonight. Lastly, if you have any criticism, if you think I'm wrong, or if you have ways that you think I can improve, please let me know in the chat or something. I'll try to read through it later. And like I said, this will go until about 7 p.m. So I'll try to be back to keyboard by then and just shut this down and see what's going on. All right, without further ado, I'll try to play this. So I hope everyone enjoys.
Dylan? I would assume people are here because they saw the title of the stream, but I'll just repeat it for everybody. The topic is Antifa a terror group? This is not on Black Lives Matter. Some people have been asking. This is not on Black Lives Matter. This is on specifically Antifa. Is Antifa a terror group? Okay. Dima, you can take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a really good question because we've seen a whole lot of rhetoric about Antifa lately. We've seen everything from Donald Trump, the president, commenting on it, to Bill Barr of the Justice Department talking about Antifa. But it in my experience, it seems like a lot of people don't really know what Antifa actually is, and that concerns me because in history, we've seen a lot of examples of groups become scapegoats, become moral scapegoats, whether there's actually any truth to the claims that are being made about them. So I want to start this by talking about what Antifa actually is. We hear the term Antifa all the time, but a lot of people don't know what it actually stands for. What Antifa actually stands for is anti-fascism or anti-fascist. It is a political movement. It's a creed. It's a set of beliefs. It's something like saying the term Christian. There are many different types of Christians, and there are many, many different types of anti-fascists. Throughout history, there have literally been, at the very minimum, hundreds upon hundreds to thousands upon thousands of anti-fascist groups in various countries, and that continues today into the United States. There have been anti-fascist groups which are strictly pacifistic. There are anti-fascist groups which are not pacifistic. And I have a whole bunch of examples of those. And I don't want to bog down in way too many historical examples, but just to give some examples of groups that are one of each type, so that you can understand that I'm trying to give a very honest picture of what anti-fascism means and what it has been historically. The first identified anti-fascist group would be recognized as a violent anti-fascist group. This is called, and pardon my pronunciation, Anti-fascistische Aktion, which was a German group which fought violently against the rise of a very, very, very barely known historical figure named Adolf Hitler. With the rise of Adolf Hitler and
could you clarify who that is for chat? Some people might be unfamiliar.
Adolf Hitler was a Nazi who ruled who led Germany during World War II and leading up to World War II. The first anti-fascist group, the group that literally began everything, was indeed a violent group. Though I think that violence. Mind you, that anti-fascist action, this group was predominantly Jewish. So they had a very good reason to fight against Adolf Hitler's rising regime and his rise to power. And many of them paid the price with their lives. And again, that's one example of a violent group, of a militant form of anti-fascism. However, many other examples exist that were not so. For example, the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee here in the United States was a strictly non-violent group, of which another little-known historical figure named Albert Einstein belonged to. Albert Einstein was an outspoken member of the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee, and these days we would say that he was a member of Antifa. So I think that going into this conversation and addressing the question, is Antifa a terrorist organization? The resounding answer is no. How could you define something like that? That would be like saying, is Christianity a terrorist organization? Even if there have been some groups of Antifa that engage in violence or something like that, to say that Antifa is a terrorist organization flies in the face of our understanding of anti-fascism on a very realistic basis, the actual history and beliefs. And it also isn't reflected in data that we have available to us today, which I'm sure we can get into to some degree. So to sum it up, anti-fascism is a political movement that has had many different sects and flavors throughout history. There is no one single group that represents anti-fascism, just like there is no single group that represents Christianity. Or any other belief system. It is a set of beliefs, and people interpret those and build off of them in many different ways. So no, Antifa is not a terrorist organization, and to say so could be, in fact, very dangerous.
Okay, you are done with your opening statement?
Yeah, that'll be everything.
Wonderful. I'm going to throw it over to Rob. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I kind of figured there were several ways that it could be gone about with this. I do believe that Antifa is a terrorist organization. I know one of the arguments that wants to be made is, oh, but they don't have a central leader, and oh, you could be in disparate Antifa groups. They don't all meet at the same lodge, like your elk club or something like that.
Rob, you're having a problem with your audio. You seem to be breaking up a little bit.
Okay, let me just say then, what I'm going to do is I was trying to stream this, so I'll just tell people that I'm streaming with, go to Dylan Burns TV on Twitch and watch the stream there. So it's more important that I be able to be heard by you all, so let me...
Okay, I'll be sure. If you want to, you can always link your channel in my chat or in the YouTube when eventually this goes up on YouTube. Okay, so tell me if this is better. Hopefully it's going better. Do I sound good so far? I can hear you. You sound perfectly clear at the moment, yes. Okay, all right. So we'll try that. So, yeah. So while it is true that they don't meet exactly in a group like an Elk Lodge or something like that, the truth of the matter is that the way we see Antifa being represented, particularly in the United States now, but also all throughout Europe, is an organization that is like the original Antifa, as Demon Mama correctly illustrates, was a group that used violence to achieve political goals. So what I want to do is first define what terrorism is, since that's at the center of this. So I just Google, the first definition comes up from Oxford that says, the unlawful use of violence or intimidation, especially against civilians in pursuit of political aims. This is exactly, by the way, you could go to other
if you want to go to dictionary.com, it's all of them have to do with the idea of using violence or intimidation, particularly against civilians, to achieve political aims. This is exactly how we see Antifa practicing in Europe and the United States right now. What they do is they use threats of violence or actual violence to achieve political goals. Many of their goals end up being anarchist or end up being communist. And one of the problems we have is that they're able to get away with this by saying, but not everyone believes like that. Oh, it's just an ideology, it's not a group. I'll be able to provide evidence that shows that these are organized attacks, particularly in small sects and groups like Rose City Antifa, John Brown Gun Clubs, other organizations like that identify as Antifa, that have been organizing the riots that we've seen occurring in the United States all around here. When I say terrorist, this is what I'm talking about, that all of these organizations under the banner of Antifa are willing to engage in intimidation or violence or to deflect for such to be able to achieve political goals. So Demon Mama says, well, it's like Christianity. We wouldn't say all sects of Christianity. No, it's not like that. It's like something, because the one thing that all of these share is that they want the demolition of the organization and the structures of things like the United States. Albert Einstein wasn't with that. And I'll ask Demon Mama when we get a chance when the opening statement is to define fascism, since the one thing that I think she'll admit is that the thing that connects them all together is that they're all anti-fascist. So it'll be important to define what fascism means. And therein lies the problem. Just like when we had discussions back in the is it okay to punch a Nazi conversation, the problem is once you say that it's okay to use violence to fight fascism, you're a stone's throw away from saying, oh, and everyone I disagree with is a fascist. For example, Donald Trump is a fascist, or Republicans are fascist, or capitalists are fascist, or people that are against the lockdowns are fascist. Figure that one out. People that are against the government abusing their power to lock people down. We saw that there were Antifa riots against people that were against the lockdowns in Europe, for example. So to me, it's not the same as saying there's different sects of Christianity. When we say that there was a Jewish anti-fascist committee, but they weren't referred to as Antifa. And this is one of the tricks that we see being played by groups like Antifa. They name themselves something that seems reasonable. Well, we're just anti-fascist. And therefore, if you're anti-fascist, that must mean you're Antifa. Well, that's not the case. There have been organizations dedicated against fighting fascism that were not Antifa. What makes Antifa Antifa is the fact that they are willing to use violence and intimidation in order to achieve political goals, especially against civilian populations. And we can see this in effect when we talk about how we've seen organizations, people that have been out and done heinous things, like the person who shot the Trump supporter in Portland, who was saying, I'm 100% Antifa. We can see this from the Department of Homeland Security that's admitted in an email that was released that they see that these Antifa organizations in places like Portland are organized and they are responsible for all these riots. So I guess that's my opening statement. I'm more interested in the back and forth because I have a lot of questions.
Okay, so just want to confirm that is the end of your opening statement?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, I'm going to open this up to free-form debate. Again, I will only try to interfere if I think it has gotten too far off track, if either of you are interrupting the other too much, or if somebody I don't feel has gotten enough time to speak. So I will throw it now open. It's open debate. You may engage as possible. Oh, also, the hand raising is kind of pointless here since there's only two people.
Okay, so if you don't mind, Demon Mama,
Yeah, absolutely.
How would you define fascism?
Oh yeah. I mean, like most belief systems and political belief systems, there are multiple definitions. But in general, the sort of uniting principles of what fascism is a highly militarized, highly authoritarian, and ultra-nationalist or hyper-nationalist form of government. It is a form of government that consolidates power. Focusing very much on national identity, sometimes on racial identity, depends on the sort of flavor of fascism. We saw that in Germany, fascism became Nazism, which fixated a lot on race. But yeah, in general, fascism has been sort of the many definitions and versions of fascism that exist center around a hyper-nationalist, very militaristic and authoritarian style of regime. I mean, I think there are a lot of examples of this that we've seen through history. And part of the reason why anti-fascism as a belief system, as a set of beliefs, rose up is because these sort of regimes had like horrific outcomes in history multiple times, just leading to unbelievable atrocity that we've seen over and over again. This type of consolidated power and otherization of people who seem different leads to some truly reprehensible things. I mean, as we know, what happened, the most famous example is in Germany, but of course, there was many other examples of fascistic governments that have done the same, even arguably that exist to this day.
Do you think that there could be a capitalist system that is not fascist?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you give? Okay, do you think the United States is fascist?
I think that there are very concerning fascistic trends in the United States, but I wouldn't go so far as to say like outright the entire United States is fascist. I have made the argument in the past that I believe that in his actions, Donald Trump is somebody who I would categorize as a fascist, and I think that I would stand by those pretty strongly. He has taken an incredible amount of action to consolidate government power. He's expressed a very clear devotion to hyper-nationalism, going so far as to propose specific educational initiatives that go to teach patriotism, which to me fits the definition of that sort of hyper-nationalistic, very, very much focused on we are the best, this exceptionalism that goes beyond just simple patriotism.
Okay, so you would say,
I think there are trends.
So it wouldn't just be the United States. So any country that wanted to talk about patriotism and thinking their country was the best would meet your definition of fascism.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, not just that, but of course you have to look at things holistically. Politics isn't a game of black and white. It isn't that simple. I mean, I would say another government that I think of as rather fascistic is something like Modi's India, for example. I think that there are very, very terrifying fascistic elements in that government, which I would criticize in the same way that I would criticize fascistic elements in our own government. And I think that many people who consider themselves anti-fascists would also find problems with many other governments.
Right, and so here's the point. So the concession that was just made is any country that wants to support patriotism and have pride in itself and support that sort of thing is fascist, and we know that there are groups of...
That's not what I said, actually. It's pretty clear.
Okay, please.
I mean, you can try to characterize it that way, but I very explicitly stated that, like, just patriotism isn't even close to an example of something that would bring. I mean, hell, like Denmark is a country that's patriotic, but they're not a country that's like ultra nationalistic. I wouldn't describe them as a country that fixates on their superiority, on their exceptionalism, and I just think that if you would have to be supremely dishonest to say that Donald Trump doesn't constantly harp on such things. Or that other leaders, such as, say, like I said, Modi, fixates on nationalistic supremacy. And again, there are going to always be sort of lines that we have to draw. When somebody says, like, oh, a hyper nationalistic country, I do think of a lot of there's a number of examples, and I think that certain elements of the United States certainly play into that. I don't think that that necessarily that means any patriotic government is somehow nationalist, is like somehow fascist automatically.
We have this nebulous definition of.
No, that's not very nebulous.
Well, it is, because the only examples you've been able to give were specific, like Donald Trump and Modi. But can you give me, without using their names, can you give me exactly the actions they've taken that have gone from just being patriotic to being patriotic enough to be considered hyper-nationalistic?
Very, very easily. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you want to talk about not the United States, because I'm sure this will be a little bit less controversial, because I know you have support, at least to some degree, for some of Donald Trump's things, but I don't really support Donald Trump. So we can talk about something else. With Modi, the handling of how he's handled Kashmir in India, the Kashmir region of India, where there has been a direct targeting of people based on both their ancestry and their religious practices, down to the police literally beating people for practicing a religion that is not accepted by Modi. Yeah, that is fascistic in my mind. Absolutely.
But that has nothing to do, like, I don't understand why the conversation of patriotism was even mentioned by you in the first place then. Like the idea of exceptionalism.
Absolutely, it does. If you're targeting someone because they are Kashmiri, which is a region of your nation that you don't believe is truly Indian in this example, then that is absolutely hyper-nationalistic. It's putting nationalism above anything else. It's targeting people and boiling people down to where they happen to be born.
But again, you
absolutely
started off talking about patriotism, undue patriotism. And I don't think that we see examples in the United States where we've gone into certain sections of the United States and said we're going to arrest people or we don't like them for the color of their skin and things like that.
I could give you right now. A statement from, I believe it was Acting Secretary Chad Wolf, regarding the black bagging of protesters, where he openly said that. Yes, we kidnapped protesters without charges and threw them into an unmarked vehicle. That was openly admitted to by the government. This is a matter of public record. So that is
for their ethnicity.
Keep in mind.
Because of nationalistic reasons. That's why we did that.
Wait, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. When you hammer on, when you are willing to go to the level of arresting protesters, saying, oh, these are anarchists or whatever, and they're not patriotic, they're against our country, when you're going to target them as if they are like committing treason, and do so extrajudicially, that's absolutely a definition of hyper-patriotism. It's where you believe that the state has supreme power over every single person within. And I can't believe that you would stand by that.
Of course, what it is, it's going to be an interpretation, as I've seen over and over. We see Antifa and their tactics engaged in supreme violence, burning down buildings, attacking law enforcement officers, attacking inner city, particularly people of color communities, burning down residential areas, shooting people, and then celebrating for the shooting of them. And then the defense is, well, we have to do all of this because there were two people that were arrested that were peaceful protesting. Yeah, I can prove all of this.
Wait a second, but that's like a lot of allegations, and none of those actually address what you were talking about. This is like a pivot to something else.
No, it's not a pivot.
Wait, hold on. Let me finish. Sure. What you were talking about was whether or not we see trends of hyper-patriotism in our country, the sort of things which anti-fascists, people who believe in anti-fascism, would, understandably, being that they oppose fascism, which is a hyper-patriotic, ultra-nationalistic form of authoritarian government, that they would want to fight against those trends. Absolutely. Now, does that mean that any tactic that any individual person who might believe in anti-fascism does is okay? Absolutely not. But that doesn't mean you can you've pivoted to a different position of questioning. We're not.
No, it's not a pivot because
because originally you were asking about whether they're. Wait.
Let's let Demon Mama finish why she thinks so, and I'll give you some time to respond.
Sure.
Right, because we were talking about whether or not there are examples of hyper-patriotism, the examples of sort of cracking down, bringing down law and order, hyper-authoritarian language, justified through hyper-patriotism. And if anybody doesn't believe me that this is the case, that there are these trends, whether or not you believe that America is a fascist country or whether you think it's trending that way or not, regardless, just watch one night of the RNC. Literally walls of American flags as someone is screaming about how teachers unions are undermining the republic.
Yeah.
This is absolutely a trend. Whether you agree with that or not, it would be foolish. It would be foolish and dishonest for you to say anything other than, yes, this is indeed hyper-patriotic.
I do want to throw this back over to Rob.
Yeah, thanks. This is exactly the point I was getting to for the audience. You can see how there's this constant conflation of what does hyper-nationalism mean. At first it was, being patriotic and believing in the idea of exceptionalism, and then it was, well, no, it's just targeting certain minority groups because they look different or they're not the same ethnicity, and that's what's uniquely bad. Then it was, well, there were peaceful protesters that were arrested, and the point I was making is, yeah, but that doesn't take into account the violent protesting that would happen. And even if I can concede that there were peaceful protesters that probably were arrested that didn't deserve it, when we're talking about a country that's on fire because of groups like Antifa that are engaged in so much violence, of course there are going to be innocent people that were out there with the violent rioters that would be arrested in situations like that. But now you can see that it's changed to, there were a lot of American flags on the panel. So that proves an alternate.
No.
I let you finish. Did I not leave you finish? Did I not let you finish?
Let him finish.
There were a lot of American flags that were there, and people were criticizing the teachers' unions. And this is true if you go to groups like Rose City Antifa. They talk about this. For example, some things that could be fascism, they say being anti-communist, opposing unions, and things like that. So they broadened the definition of what fascism is out to mean so much. In fact, the original anti-fascist group that was in Germany used to consider all forms of capitalism exploitation and said that that was fascism. So the original Antifa group that used violence, as Demon Mama admitted, said that capitalism was part of being fascist. And so we can see that this is exactly the problem. We've already conceded that there are many people in Antifa that are willing to use violence to fight fascism, and now we can't even get a clear articulation of what fascism is. It's ever growing. Well, if you have too many American flags, if you oppose teachers' unions, if you think that the America is exceptional and it's the greatest country in the world, all of these are symbols of fascism. They say, well, Donald Trump is fascist. And by extension, I haven't heard Dima Mama say this, but I'll ask her in a moment, Trump supporters are fascist. And this is the problem with an organization like Antifa. Remember, go back to that definition. What is terrorism? The unlawful use of violence and intimidation, especially against civilians in the pursuit of political aims. This is what Antifa does. They go out and they say, well, the United States is fascist, therefore we're justified in burning down buildings. And it culminates in actions like we saw in Portland with the death of Jay Danielson, who was not only executed by someone who said, quote, I'm 100% Antifa on his social media, but then members of Antifa later that night celebrated, and I have the video to prove it if we need to, that they were glad that a fascist was killed that night and were celebrating it. So an innocent man gunned down in cold blood because he was a Trump supporter, and this group cheers that on. And we have to somehow believe, well, this isn't trying to use violence or intimidation against civilians to achieve a political end. I heavily disagree.
Okay, I mean, you talked about quite a lot of different things there, and just so that we set the record straight, what you asked me for was you asked first for a definition of fascism, then you asked for a definition or examples of hyper-patriotism, which I have shown quite few of. And keep in mind that hyper-patriotism and ultranationalism is a part of the motivating factors of fascism. You seem very fixated on that. Also, I just before we go too far, I really, really feel like it's very dishonest for you to say that there was an execution of someone in Portland. That is very loaded language. For as far as I know, in fact, I know for a fact that this has not been litigated in court because the police actually killed the suspect in that killing. So we don't actually know what happened. Video evidence of it, which I have reviewed extensively on my own, on my channel. Anybody who doesn't believe me can go do this. There is no clear information as to what happened there. Was someone killed? Yes. Is that a terrible thing? Absolutely. But it is completely dishonest and slanted and propagandistic for you to frame that as an execution. And likewise, I think that you trying to link Antifa, which again, by every single metric that we have, is a very broad and very diverse political movement that has existed over the last century, that has had many different people who thought many different things as a single group that can then be labeled as terrorist is wild. And I want to just point out a couple of reasons why I think it's very dishonest and not only dishonest, but also somewhat dangerous. Dangerous to try and label a group as a terrorist, especially using like a dictionary.com definition of terrorism. So real quick, I just wanted to bring up a couple of topics concerning the definition of terrorism. So as you probably know, maybe you don't, I know you're working off the dictionary.com definition, which is fine. That's fine for a lot of colloquial talk. But as we're talking, more in depth here in politics, I'm more interested in having a more solid definition of of terrorism. The thing is, terrorism is actually incredibly, incredibly hard to define. Let me see here. Let me just get the date real quick here of the exact date that this happened. One moment here. In 1996, for example, the United Nations General Assembly convened in order to make an attempt to define terrorism in a fashion that countries could agree upon, so that we could. This was before we really had the war on terrorism and whatnot. That process has been completely deadlocked. I mean, literally unprecedentedly deadlocked, because as it turns out, defining terrorism is really hard, and countries, including the United States, have backed away from or held off from defining terrorism because a lot of their own actions could be defined as terrorism. And this actually gets even worse when we dig into stuff like, for example, the Patriot Act. The ACLU has a wonderful, wonderful analysis of the way that the Patriot Act defines terrorism. Keep in mind, not for the purpose of crime. The Patriot Act is only talking about whether they can surveil. But groups as peaceful as civil rights movements would fit the definition, like the Rainbow Coalition, for example, is one that they brought up that could potentially, under the Patriot Act, be considered a terrorist group and therefore subject to wiretapping of the individual members' phones. That's unbelievable levels that you're willing to go. And this is mind you, this is lawyers. These are lawyers who do law for a living who wrote this entire document opposing the way that the Patriot Act defines domestic terrorism.
That would be why I'm not using the Patriot Act. In fact, I'm heavily opposed to the Patriot Act. I see a lot of similarities with what happened with the Patriot Act with a lot of the lockdowns we're seeing today, and I'm against that as well. The point is, that's why we shouldn't rely on the government to tell us what terrorism is. And this is a sophist point that people try to make. Well, we can't understand what the word means or it's dangerous. No, it's a very simple definition. If you're using violence or intimidation to make a political point, well, I understand you would want to reject that. Well, let me ask you some other groups. Do you think that Nazis are terrorists? Or a terrorist group?
I mean, I don't know. Like, that would be really hard. Like, it would I mean, I think somebody who's just like your grandpa, like for example, I have had a family member in the past who was a Nazi. Do I think they were a terrorist? No. They were like very, very offensive on a personal level and incredibly horrible to be around. But they never engaged in anything that I would consider terrorism. And therefore, I would be very careful to label that.
What would you consider terrorism? That's the point, right?
Oh, I mean, I am very careful with how I determine terrorism.
But
I would think something
so
like
you don't think anything's terrorist?
Oh, a pretty clear example of a terrorism would be like, I don't know, like flying the plane into the World Trade Center.
Okay.
Absolutely. Like,
so what if instead of flying a plane, what if instead they would have shot people on the street for the same reasons? Would that be terrorism? Like the San Bernardino shooting, is that terrorism?
But I mean, I think that could be absolutely.
Okay, what if instead of that, let me ask this: what if instead of that they threw Molotov cocktails at state buildings for the same reasons, for the same Al Qaeda inspired reasons? Would that be terrorism?
Yeah, I think that could be terrorism.
Okay, so what's the difference?
Hold on.
So what's the difference then?
Hold on, let me reply.
Rob, I want to let her clarify her answer though.
Okay.
I think she should be able to clarify her answer.
Yeah, a lot of these things could be defined as terrorism, but here's the thing: when we are talking about defining someone as a terrorist, it is childlike to try and think that it is going to be divorced from any sort of impact on the outer world. For example, I mean, how would you feel if I walked into this conversation and accused you of being a Nazi, or worse? What if I accused you of being a murderer? You would think that would be pretty irresponsible. What if I accused you of something like being like a rapist? Wouldn't that be terrible? These are things that could impact you really, really bad. In fact, accusations, outright accusations with no evidence and stuff can damage a person's life. I'm sure you will agree with this. I'm sure you'll agree.
Okay, if I could respond, you've had quite a long time to talk.
Well,
yes,
I mean, hold on a second. But Rob, like you alleged a lot of things and you asked me a number of questions.
You just had a 7-minute block that you went on.
Well, Demon Mama, I'll give you 30 seconds to finish your point. Then I'm going to throw it over to Rob. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. It's just when you label somebody a terrorist, there's some pretty rough things that can happen to somebody who's labeled a terrorist in our country. For example, like I said, with the Patriot Act, there's an incredible amount of invasion of privacy. But I will point to, there's this thing that a lot of people may know about called the Iraq War. A lot of people died in the Iraq War. A lot of people died under allegations of terrorism, under the guise of going against a war of terror, which at that point had no proper legal definition. So that war was justified using a moral panic over terrorism, and we didn't even attack the people who were responsible for it. We attacked completely unrelated people.
Okay, that's 30 seconds. I'm going to give it over to Rob.
Okay, so a nice, impressive filibuster block. I got that. So the point that you just made, wouldn't it be terrible to call someone a rapist Wouldn't it be terrible? How about this? Would it be terrible to call someone a fascist? Oh, that's what Antifa does. It just calls people fascists. Or would it be terrible to call organizations systemically racist? Oh, that's the entire idea behind all of these riots in the first place. So I find it very ironic that the same side that wants to put harmful labels on people, the same side that wants to put harmful labels on the other side and say, you're fascist, you're Nazi, you're racist, you're systemically racist, you're patriarchal. The same side that wants to do that is now all of a sudden has a problem when we look at people that are firebombing, as you admitted, throwing a Molotov cocktail at a state building would be considered an act of terrorism if Al-Qaeda did it. But then you say, but it's harmful to label people. Okay, then you say it would be harmful to label someone who did that in the name of anti-fascism to label them a terrorist. I say that this is ridiculous, and it's clearly trying to change the definition and water down the language. Because you admitted that the action itself was terrorism.
Let's let Rob finish.
Right, it'd be different. We could have a back and right. We could have a back and forth if you weren't doing 6-minute blocks, but I have to do a 6-minute block to keep up with yours, just to make sure we're each getting sort of equal time. So when you admit that the throwing of a Molotov cocktail, if it was done by Al-Qaeda at a state building, that would be considered terrorism. But you say, oh, if someone does it for a different political motivation, then we have to be hesitant to call it terrorism. You say that would be like calling someone a rapist without proof. But I have proof. That's the point. We see the person that was labeled themselves Antifa walk up and shoot someone. You say that that's not an execution. I agree that we should hear this out in a court of law, which sadly will never happen because apparently that gentleman who shot and murdered, I believe executed Jay Danielson, also opened fire on police and got himself killed in that manner. But what we saw quite clearly from looking at this from my was...
Demo, I swear you'll have time, I swear.
What I saw when looking at it was we heard them clearly say, we got one here, and they said there, then they shot, then they left. It didn't appear that there was anything that justified that type of shooting. Again, it's ironic from people saying, well, wait, we have to hold judgment on this, that have the exact opposite take if we see law enforcement, unfortunately, have to execute someone. So I just think that it's funny that all of a sudden the definition changed, regardless if we call it an execution or not. The point is this. In that particular situation, we saw people that self-identified as Antifa later that night celebrate the death of Jay Danielson and say that it was the killing of a fascist. So this was Antifa, a person who self-proclaimed being an Antifa, murdering someone, and then other people, I don't think that they had any more clarification than me or you have at the time, the people on the street, yet they celebrated this death as the death of killing a fascist. Now, you talk about the dangers of labeling someone a terrorist, yet flippantly you say people that support American exceptionalism or have a problem with teachers' unions or have too many American flags may be fascists. We see here what happens when groups like Antifa think you're fascist. If you're murdered by one of them, they celebrate and say, well, you were a fascist, you deserved it. So I think that it's just interesting that we see that it's now boiled down to, well, can we really define what terrorism is? Yes, I used a definition that I thought was quite simple, that you could go through many common man sources that actually are tasked with defining terms like dictionary.com, Oxford, Merriam-Webster, and others that all say the key is when you are using violence or intimidation to achieve a political goal, that is terrorism. Yes, I won't disagree with you that the United States government has engaged in regime change wars around the world that are absolutely disgusting and use terrorism as a reason for doing so. But that doesn't mean that we can no longer label anyone terrorists that are clearly terrifying the civilian population of this country by using violence and intimidation all across the country.
Okay, so I want to open this back into free form, so I don't have to pass it back and forth every 5 minutes, and so I'm gonna pass it back to free form, and I'll probably start with a free form off of Demon Mama because she obviously will want to respond.
Yeah, I mean, there's been so very much that was said there that I just really think is just it really feels like. And I'm not trying to be harsh here, but it does feel like you're propagandizing a bit. Because here's the thing, in coming into this conversation, I brought up the historical context of Antifa and anti-fascism as a movement, and then when you start to talk about specific examples, you're willing to make huge jumps in judgment that I think are really are really dishonest and not fair. And I think that that's misleading. Like, for example, constantly, like, you multiple times have framed what happened in Portland, which the video evidence is almost nothing. Keep in mind, that just because two people got in a fight, we have no way to understand what it was. It could have been that this supposed Antifa guy that you're talking about was the most murderous person in the world. That's very possible. It's also possible he acted in self-defense. We will never get to know that because he was executed by the police.
Oh, well, you just used the term execute, didn't you?
Hold on a second. Wait a minute. He was executed by the
How?
police. Do you know how many bullets were shot?
What does it matter? Do you know how many he shot at them?
30 to 40 bullets are shot. Yes, that is what we call an execution.
Do you know how
Absolutely.
many was shot at that he shot at them?
No, because there's no evidence that he shot at them.
Oh, so
there was no
without
evidence that he
proof,
shot at them.
So without proof, you'll say that he was executed, but then you criticize me for the very same
because
thing.
There's a difference. You see, police aren't supposed to kill people. People
Yes, they are if they're firing at them.
No,
Yes.
the police are not Judge Dredd, my dude. Listen, I understand if you would prefer a world where the police are supposed to be judge, jury, and executioner, but when the police unload on somebody and people nearby are screaming that there was 30 or 40 shots fired at him, and we don't have evidence that he shot back, we do a thing called presuming innocence. And when the representatives of supposed law and order are the ones who killed somebody, that is absolutely fair to call that an execution.
It's an absurd state. You can't
It is the
presume
state.
just
Wait a
because
minute.
you're
That is the
police-
definition of an execution.
No,
that is
the opposite.
definition.
You actually have this exactly opposite.
Dishonesty.
You actually have this exact opposite. See, we've given the monopoly of violence to the state. This is something that the civilized world did a long time ago, and it was actually a really good thing. We didn't want vigilantism. We didn't want people just going around like the Wild West shooting stuff. So we agreed that we would allow law enforcement to have basically the monopoly on use of force like that. So when law enforcement results in someone dying, there are legitimate situations when that could be warranted, such as if that person fired back at law enforcement. That would be a legitimate use of force. You then determine. So what you've done then is you've decided that this is an execution.
Well, you see,
what you've done is you've determined this is an execution.
Okay. So this is too contentious for me to just let this be open. We might have to do back and forth for a little bit now. Rob,
well,
finish.
I just feel like it's like it goes from.
Okay.
Go ahead, leave
Rob,
Demon Mama
please.
respond. That's fine.
Okay. Demon Mama, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I really want to resist us jumping from one thing to another really, really fast, especially when it's something like this. You see, in this circumstance, we've presumed the innocence of the person. That's what you do. I never stated that this was never once did I in this conversation state that the guy was purely acting in self-defense. What I stated is the fact which we don't know. What we do know about the second situation is we know that the police killed a man, and there's no existing evidence right now, which you would think that evidence would exist. Perhaps it will come out, and at that point we can then say maybe it wasn't. But there's no existing evidence right now that he shot back at the police. There is evidence that the police shot, being the supposed arbiters of law and order, shot 30 to 40 rounds into this guy.
Okay,
so
well, we don't have.
That is
you
fair,
might not
that
know,
is fair.
but so then you're just saying there could be evidence, but I don't have access to it. Yet you're very criticism of me in a video that we can see, which there is no evidence that this Jay Danielson shot back at the guy that killed him. We see that, and you say, well, you can't call that an execution. So on one hand, you look at the evidence
because it's not.
It just shows the double standard.
Wait,
it shows
do you not
that you're
know what an
willing to presume
execution is?
people guilty. You presume that the cops did something wrong because you haven't seen evidence that said that they were shot back. Therefore, you presume their guilt. But on the other hand, you say, oh, despite the video evidence that we all saw of this Antifa person going up and shooting someone that didn't draw a gun on them, we could see the video of it then running. If it was a legitimate shoot, why didn't he stay and talk to the police? So all the evidence we could actually see with our own eyes, you say, no, we have to presume innocence. Do you think that the person that killed George Floyd is
Wait. Hold on. Something you said there is again playing into this narrative that you are writing to justify your positions. I am presuming the innocence of the people involved. See, there's this thing. When we have given a monopoly of violence to the state, when the state has the weapons, when the state is able to go in and enforce the law, we have to presume the innocence of the people who are being brought into the law. We cannot, because he is dead. Also, numerous local sources, I have a number of these, numerous local sources, witnesses to the event, the people whose testimonies we have, because there was no video footage of the killing of what's his name? Michael Reinoehl, I think his name is. Multiple witnesses there reported that they did not hear the police issuing orders to him before they opened fire. So what I am saying is that both of these situations are very murky, but you are trying to use them to justify the idea that all of Antifa is violent, but that's not what it says. You do not have the evidence to go from a person died in Portland in an altercation, which we don't know the details of because the video is incredibly unclear, and then they were killed by the state before being able to go to trial. For whatever reason, they were killed by the state, even if it was in your mind justified. They were killed by the state. He will never be able to go to trial now. So we don't know, and you are using this as proof to try and make this claim that Antifa is a terrorist organization. And again, I will just point out that you're making a huge allegation to claim that all people who are involved in Antifa, which would include, mind you, people like Albert Einstein, are somehow terrorists because of a situation we have no evidence to prove would be an example of terrorism. That's absurd.
I feel that that's a good part to discuss. I was not using this specific situation to show that everyone in Antifa is violent. I was using it to show...
You did.
No, that's not what I did. I brought it up to show the point I was talking about wasn't just the execution. It was also the celebration by Antifa that did not have the evidence that said that they celebrated that a fascist was murdered. Which you didn't talk about. The reason that I got hung up on this execution part was just pointing out your hypocrisy. Because on one hand you say, no, someone that shoots someone's innocent until proven guilty, so I'm uncomfortable saying execution. And then the very next thing you do is say, oh, but these police executed him. Why aren't they innocent until proven guilty?
Wait a minute. Because they admitted to it. They killed the man.
So Reinoehl didn't kill Danielson?
Wait, hold on. Hold on a second. You're not understanding the basics of this situation. The police killed a guy. They admit they killed the guy. Now, as to what actually happened, we don't know. But the police carried out an execution on a guy. Whether it was justified or not, that is what it is. We do not know what happened between Mike Reinoehl and
So you don't know if Reinoehl killed Danielson?
What's that?
You don't know if Reinoehl killed Danielson. He admitted it to Vice. He admitted it on Vice.
Wait a minute. We don't, but here's the thing. We don't know what happened. We don't know what happened. Yes, I think it's fair. I think it's safe to assume that Mike Reinoehl was the one. To be fair, he wasn't tried in court, but I think it's fair to assume that given his interviews and whatnot. But that doesn't mean that we know what happened there. And you
don't know what happened in the police shooting of Reinoehl.
Wait, hold on.
You don't know what happened in the police shooting of Reinoehl.
Wait,
you don't know.
We do.
No, you don't. You don't know. You're just lying. You're lying. You don't know. You admitted you don't know. You said evidence could come out that he shot. You're admitting you don't know.
You're literally not understanding the difference between two situations. In one situation,
no, I understand.
Wait. No. Let me finish this, please, because this is really important to your argument. That you be clear on this, because you're making huge allegations and you're not actually putting together an argument that follows. So keep in mind, what we're talking about between Jay Danielson and Mike Reinoehl is an altercation that occurred on the street where there is no. Where there was incredibly unclear video footage from a bystander, not a engagement between the state, numerous officials of the state who did kill somebody. They did open fire on him. We're talking about two separate situations, and you are acting as if they're not that they're the same situation, but they're different, and that is why there's a different outcome for each one.
The similarities are this. The similarities are this. You've admitted that you don't know what happened in either situation, yet you're comfortable calling one an execution, and you criticize me for calling the other an execution. That's the similarities that matter.
What I criticized you for was calling something that we don't know what an execution is, an execution. And you did this in service of trying to make an argument that Antifa was somehow terrorists. But that doesn't, first of all, that wouldn't prove that Antifa is a terrorist anyway. And secondly, you don't know what happened there. We do know. Now, again, I will restate this because I just want you to understand what's being said. That Mike Reinoehl was executed by the state. That is a fact.
Define execution.
An execution is when the state kills somebody.
Oh, so an execution is only when the state kills someone.
Oh no, I mean, I think you can have a like sort of colloquial execution. Like, for example, if somebody made somebody get down on their knees and hurt them or shot them, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to be like TOS or whatever, but absolutely. But when we understand an execution, it is absolutely definitionally an execution when the state decides to kill somebody. Now, we might have another conversation, another night, not tonight, I would hope, whether an execution is justified. But it absolutely is an execution.
Look,
that is a matter of fact.
We're getting off track.
Wait. That's not a matter of opinion. That's a matter of fact.
But here's the matter of fact. So what you've just said is that if A cop sitting in the street like these ones that were shot in Compton, get shot twice in the head like the ones that were shot in Compton. They pull their gun out, fire back, and kill the person that was there. They executed that person. If that's your definition of an execution, it's so watered down and meaningless that it doesn't matter. Because clearly in that Compton situation, they would have been justified killing the person.
You're talking about literally a completely different circumstance.
But you don't understand. Like, this is something that I see commonly that people do is when I ask them to define something, they'll just say, they'll make some definition. When the state executes someone, or when the state kills someone, that's an execution.
That's what an execution is, though.
Okay,
when the state...
If they would have, so I'm just asking. So that situation in Compton, if the cops would have shot back and killed that person, they would have executed him.
I mean, if they had been able to take him, yeah, I guess that would be an execution.
Okay,
if they
thanks.
Killed him,
then the term's meaningless.
Absolutely.
So okay, so it has no negative connotation.
Wait a minute. No. That is not a fair accusation to just say my thing is meaningless. Let me ask you this: would you not call it an execution when, say, John Wayne Gacy was killed by lethal injection by the state?
Sure, that's an execution. It would also
Despite
be an execution if someone hunts down someone for their political beliefs and murders them in cold blood. That's also an execution.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be fair. But the thing is that here's the thing. And again, this is what you're failing to address, because you fail to address it, it's undermining your entire argument, which is the idea that you refuse to acknowledge that it is a matter of fact that the state did execute Michael Reinoehl, whether you think that's justified or not. Listen, whether you think it's justified or not, it's a fact that they did. It is not a fact as to what happened between Mike Reinoehl and the other person. We do not know. Nobody knows that.
I'm not saying that, but here's the difference. I'm not agreeing with your definition of execution. I'm not agreeing with your definition of your definition of execution is anytime a police officer kills anyone, even if it's justified, it's an execution. I don't agree with that. I say if someone's shooting back at the police, it's not an execution. That's simple. You don't know if Reinoehl was shooting back at the police.
Are you familiar with the term like judge, jury, and executioner? Do you know what an executioner actually is?
Yes.
An executioner is a state-appointed person who kills somebody else. That can be a police person. Now listen, if you want to pick a different word, if you're getting really hung up on the term execution here, but let's say if let's just turn this around on you just real quick and see if you're going to be consistent with this. Because if you don't want to call the killing of Michael Reinoehl an execution, all right, fine. If you want to not call it that, but then can you at least admit that you are absolutely wrong if I am wrong in calling the state a group of police officers killing someone with state power an execution, then you are absolutely wrong about calling the killing a killing where we do not have evidence of what actually happened an execution, and that you were jumping the gun and once again, just like you do with Antifa, accusing things without evidence.
Okay,
can you not admit that?
Here's what I'll admit. If your argument is
that's gonna name you dishonest.
Are you respond? So you really don't want my answer? Is that what it is? When I start answering,
go for it.
Okay. But my articulation would be: if your claim is, well, until we have all of the facts that play out in a court of law, we shouldn't call someone an execution. That's fine. I'll accept your definition. The point I was trying to make is, I'm not the one who hyperventilated about the term execution. That's what you did to me, and then proceeded to immediately use the term execution and admit, oh, but I don't have all the facts of what happened in this case with Reinoehl.
Wait.
I was merely pointing out your hypocrisy. Now, to get back on track, will you concede that Antifa in Portland also didn't know all the situations of Danielson's murder when they cheered that they had killed a fascist?
I mean, I don't like, okay, so there's a number of things here. First of all, you've made this allegation that, and again, I will point to the fact that whenever you talk about Antifa, you are very broad with your statements. You say, oh, Antifa was celebrating. Are you trying to say that every person who identifies with Antifa in Portland, which is probably quite a lot of people, was celebrating the death of the person who was executed?
I'm saying the ones that were on the street were. Yes.
Okay. So you're saying that the people who, there was people standing by and there were people who saw it and who were like, oh, good. I don't know. Like, what you're saying is some random allegation of random people. You know, like it doesn't really reflect on Antifa to me because I don't know. I know a lot of people in this area, for example, and sure, this is anecdote, as much an anecdote as you saying that you saw people celebrating is. But there's tons of people who don't celebrate any of that shit, and they're absolutely people who consider themselves anti-fascists. Like, I think that what you're doing is you saw some people who, I would agree. I literally was on a panel like a week and a half ago where I argued that celebrating the death of this guy was a complete mistake. You can actually see the VOD. It actually caused quite a bit of drama I was involved in for telling somebody that I don't think that they should celebrate that. And I imagine this person probably identifies an anti-fascist. But unlike you, I'm able to distinguish the difference between someone who calls themselves an anti-fascist, who I might disagree with, or that person being bad, and all anti-fascists being bad. And even though you made the argument at one point that it's somehow different from Christianity, I would see it. I see it as no different. You're saying someone with a set of political beliefs that all of these people are somehow bad because one person did something.
I'm saying that we could go to
isn't borne out in reality. You're making up a conspiracy.
That's not true. For example, we'll go to Rose City Antifa. For example, we'll go to the Rose City Antifa group that's in Portland, right? Want to go to their website?
Let's talk about Rose City.
They talk about Black Bloc as a tactic that they embrace, where they have to stay anonymous. You can go to this site, crimethink.com, and check it out. You go to CrimeThink, and it talks about the importance of Black Bloc using physical violence against police and other fascists in order to achieve political goals. That's part of what Black Bloc is, learning tactics on how to arm yourself, how to keep your face concealed, to use tactics to swarm people, to use tactics to make sure that you can't be arrested, to use tactics to make sure you can engage in violence and intimidation. Now, this is embraced by Rose City Antifa, which is the Antifa group in Portland. Now, given that...
It's not the... No, see, you've done it again. You've done it again.
Okay, can you name me another Antifa group in Portland?
No, hold on a second. There's a number of Antifa groups in Portland. Are you kidding me? Antifa is, in fact, just so you know, it's quite wild because the Trump government, Trump, who regularly talks about and motions towards Antifa as this sort of boogeyman very frequently, his own government has come to the conclusion that there are very few centrally organized Antifa groups, and the ones that exist are very small and tend to do things that have nothing to do with political violence. So you're talking about Rose City Antifa, and you assert that it's the only Antifa group in Portland, which is patently not true. Not only do I know a number of people...
That's fair enough. Since you know more about Antifa in Portland, can you show me an example of an Antifa group in Portland that expressly condemns violence?
Wait, what?
You know all of these. You apparently have a great amount of knowledge of Antifa groups in Portland. Can you show me one of their statement that they condemn violence?
Hold on a second. But you're asking me to prove something that you alleged. You were the one who alleged.
No, you just said that you know a bunch of other groups. You just said you know a bunch of other Antifa groups in Portland, and that they're not.
I actually do know another Antifa. I do know another Antifa group. Portland Mutual Aid. Portland Mutual Aid does not engage in any sort of Black Bloc or violent protest.
So
Portland
can you show me there's?
Oh wait, you asked me a question. Now you got to let me talk. I know, because you opened a can of worms. As it turns out, I know a lot of Antifa organizations. In fact, you know what? I even brought one up at the beginning, if you'd been listening at all. One of the most famous anti-fascist groups in the entire history of the world, which, again, I will cite, Albert Einstein was a member of. So I guess you want to call him a terrorist in retrospect as well. But this group,
this is so dumb. This is so dumb. They did not call the group that Albert Einstein was in. Did not call themselves Antifa. They did not. They said that they were... Wait a minute. Hold on a second. Yes, they did.
No, they didn't. Antifa... Wait a second. Antifa is a contraction, my dude. That's like being like, oh, the Seattle police didn't call themselves SPD because you make a contraction. Antifa is short for anti-fascist. People say that as a short thing. You think that just because you shortened the name that all of a sudden you can pretend that they're like something else? These groups call themselves, all anti-fascists call themselves anti-fascists.
They wear the same symbols of the original anti-fascista group with the two flags that you talked about.
Embrace violence.
I'm still waiting for you.
That's no different than Christianity.
This gets so annoying.
Okay.
Wait a minute. This could be the debate if you want. Go ahead, say something.
Wait
a minute. Okay, go ahead, say something.
Are you?
Wait a minute. Now, can you just let me finish my point? Would that be all right? You admitted that the original Antifa, anti-fascista group in Germany embraced using violence to achieve their goals. Why is it that the groups that colloquially identify themselves as Antifa wear the exact same symbolism, embrace the exact same violent topics, or violent tactics? Just because a group had anti-fascist committee in their name doesn't mean that they identified as Antifa. And this is a trick that we see oftentimes employed. It would be like if the KKK changed their name to the We Love Puppies group, you couldn't say, well, you can't say the KKK is a violent group because other people that love puppies weren't violent. What Albert Einstein and that group that was against the Nazis had to do with had nothing to do whatsoever with the people that identify as the organization Antifa today. And it would be, again, you say it's like Christianity. No, I say it's more like Nazi, where there isn't a group that's just the single Nazi group. There are skinheads, there are people that call themselves all sorts of organizations that agreed with the original Nazi tenets, but I would be able to say that everyone in those groups are disgusting and that the vast majority of them are terrorist groups because they use violence and intimidation against civilians to achieve political ends. For example, I wouldn't have been looking at Richard Spencer's group saying, well, now wait a minute, not everyone in Richard Spencer's group wanted Heather Heyer to die, so it's unfair to look at Richard Spencer's group and say that they're bad. And finally, since you know the other organizations that identify as Antifa in Portland that denounce violence, I'll be happy for you to show me the source that shows that they're denouncing violence.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I can find you that. I don't have it on hand because I wasn't expecting you to try and get like a cheap gotcha when you made a completely spurious claim, and you have it. Even in this sentence, you made spurious claims about Antifa. First of all, your like strange distinction that they didn't use the term Antifa back then means that they weren't anti-fascist. Antifa is short for anti-fascist, my dude. It's literally a colloquialism. There's no difference. There's no group that just only calls themselves Antifa. Antifa is just shorthand. There's no you've made a distinction without a difference. There's no difference between Antifa and anti-fascism besides what's like perhaps some people who allege mass conspiracies that there's some difference. These groups. Now another thing that you brought up this thing about symbology. There are groups that use all kinds of symbology, and while that can be useful sometimes, it doesn't necessarily guarantee anything. And also, I don't think I'm going to call your bluff here. I don't think you have the evidence to prove what groups use what symbology and which ones don't.
Okay,
you just don't.
So I have Rose City Antifa's group that uses the flags.
Sure. Okay, that's great, but that means we're talking about Rose City Antifa.
Okay.
We're not talking about Antifa. And keep in mind that you came to this discussion to have the discussion whether Antifa is a terrorist organization, and it is definitively not. And your argument so far has been completely centered on one specific type of anti-fascist.
It is. Let me ask you this. From
wait.
Would you
Hold
say
on,
that?
I want to explain this because you got to do your whole rant, and you alleged a lot of things like you have done in most of your rants here, where you allege a lot of things without evidence. So this is like when you point to the symbology, I can't believe that you would then go from right there to ignoring the direct comparison to something like Christianity. All Christians use the cross. All Christians, with very few exceptions, use the cross, but that doesn't mean they all believe in the same thing. They have very different beliefs. Anybody who has a sort of nuanced understanding of how organizations and belief systems work would never make such broad accusations as to say all of Christianity or all of Antifa is X. And yet you've done that again and again and again in this conversation. You've accused them of being a terrorist organization, which, again, I will point to you, the repercussions for somebody being labeled a terrorist can be as far as millions of deaths.
What are the repercussions for labeling someone a fascist?
Oh, I mean, I don't know. There could be all kinds of repercussions. We can
but you
have
do that.
That's a different conversation.
Oh, okay. So just so we could get you off the moral high horse of don't label people something, because you're quite readily calling people fascists, and you know that they could be murdered for that. So okay. So now that we're off that moral high horse, the argument is you keep going back to this.
Anybody was like
you said Donald Trump has fascist tendencies. This country's fascist. People that talk about the teachers' unions fascist. Yes.
Hold on a second. Wait a minute. Hold on a second. I just want to make a quick distinction here, which is that, first of all, you would have to substantiate the idea that calling someone a fascist has the same impact as calling someone a terrorist. And I don't think you can do that. If you can, I'd be interested to sort of hash that out. But I will note it is a different conversation that we're having, but I'm more than happy to discuss it with you. However, it is very different. Calling someone a fascist is not the same as calling someone a terrorist, as we know. And I came to this discussion prepared with the knowledge that, hey, if you call somebody a terrorist, we've justified war over calling somebody a terrorist.
Right, we justified war over fascist. We've never justified war over fascism? That's your argument?
I mean, that's a stretch to say that why we got involved. a minute. Hold on a second. The idea that we got involved in World War II because they were fascist, that's not reality. That's not what happened. There was a absolute confluence of political forces that got us to involve. I mean, you could say, it would be to the case of, by the way, it would be to the case of Antifa if you were to make the argument that we got involved in World War II because of fascism, because by its definition,
this
I
is
would
just
argue
nonsense.
Wait,
have an example.
You gotta let me finish, man. You gotta let me finish.
I feel like you. Go ahead.
You're getting really mad, but you gotta.
I'm not mad. It's just it's a point that's like we literally are talking about someone who was just murdered, and then people celebrated because it was the death of a fascist. Literally happened.
Wait a minute, but hold on a second. But I literally just told you that I literally personally had an argument with somebody who was I believe unduly celebrating that death. I don't believe
but
it.
Many
so don't
did.
Ascribe me. Wait. But don't ascribe me positions. And also, I would ask that again.
That's not what I'm doing. That's your exact argument. You're saying I can't call someone a terrorist because other people might go out and do them harm. I say you call people fascist and other people might go out and do them harm. You say don't ascribe to me that. Well, then how are you ascribing to me? If you can call someone a fascist with the understanding that could lead to harm being caused to them, how can you then get in a moral high horse and say that if you call someone a terrorist, harm could come to them?
Rob.
You cut out?
Who cut out?
Can I hear you? Can you say something, Rob?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Am I still here? I think his Discord crashed.
I think your Discord might have crashed.
Me?
Now I can hear you. Okay, there it is. Sorry, you just cut out for a second. There you go. Okay, good.
Yeah. Okay, so, there's a couple of things here. Again, you didn't listen to what I said literally just before you started talking about that. If you want to say that labeling somebody a fascist, and by the way, I would agree with you in saying that we should be careful about labeling people fascist. I don't just label people fascists at random. In fact, I literally advocate that people be very, very careful about such a thing. You, however, walked into this discussion perfectly willing to claim that Antifa is a terrorist organization without any considerations. I mean, you can say that it is, but you haven't provided that evidence.
Sure.
And in this, wait, in the course of this discussion, I have brought up unequivocal examples of when the title of terrorist has been explicitly used, not even secondarily, but explicitly used to harm people, to kill many people, sometimes. In fact, many of those people who had nothing to do with the terrorist act themselves. Keep in mind, under the guise of fighting terrorism, we went to war with Iraq. We killed civilians.
This is a worthless point. Rapists
it is not a worthless point. It is absolutely essential.
What it is,
how dare you?
It is
like you want to talk about.
Wait a minute.
Hold on a second.
Wait a minute.
You're about to be muted. Okay. Maybe I didn't clarify this at the beginning. If I start talking, everybody shuts down. I've had you both on enough HippieW podcasts. I didn't think I needed to mention that, but I will mention that down. If I start talking, we're shutting it down because nothing of value is happening. So, Dear Mama, you said something. He responded, and he said something that I know outraged you, but he didn't get to finish his statement as to why. So I would like to hear him finish his statement as to why before outrage is done.
Right. So we can say all the time that groups are hate groups or terrorist groups, even if that doesn't mean that every single person that was in that group would have been a terrorist or a hate-filled person. For example, I could with unabashedly say that the KKK is a hateful and was a terrorist group that used violence and intimidation. I could say that. I wouldn't say, now wait a minute, we shouldn't say the KKK is that, because if we say that they're a terrorist group, then bad things could happen to members of the KKK, and that would be bad. This is an absurd point. It's just trying to deflect from the point. Now, to get back on the topic, so I provided evidence, for example, of Rose City Antifa, the group in Portland. Let me just say this. At best that you'll be able to get in this debate is other groups that have said the word anti-fascist in their name might not necessarily be terrorist groups. But then we could say all the groups that we see engaged in Black Bloc that are out there, and those are the groups of prominence that are doing all these riots, all of those individual groups are terrorist groups. So at the end of the day, you might be able to make an argument that, well, there could be other groups that call themselves Antifa that just aren't in the political sphere right now or in the civil sphere that don't engage in this violence. Black Bloc, which most of these Antifa groups admit that they engage in, it says right on the website that they link to that it's a group that it's a tactic that prescribes using violence to achieve political changes. We can see other groups like the Puget Sound John Brown Gun Club, who had a member named let me get his name here, Wilhelm. von Spronson, who in 2019 attacked an ICE facility, firebombed it, had long arms, was going to free people that were in this facility. If you go to the John Brown Gun Club for July 13th, 2020, they released a statement marking how he's a hero. He was widely celebrated in Antifa circles. I could point to you literature that was put out by Antifa groups that is saying, this is how you riot properly. This is how you do these things properly. At the beginning of these George Floyd riots that was released by Atlanta's Antifa site. I could point to you Rose City Antifa, Atlanta Antifa, New York City Antifa, and other organizations tweeting before they made their Twitter private, giving out tactics and how to do these riots properly, and doing other things like saying where police were to avoid people getting arrested by police. Now, all of this stuff's occurring, and what we now see is up to $2 billion of damage, incredible violence and intimidation, even to the point where we've had Black Lives Matter people asking these Antifa people to stop burning down inner city black neighborhoods. And the deflection's going to be, well, we shouldn't call them terrorists, although they're using violence and intimidation to achieve political ends, because it might result in someone being attacked by the U.S. government.
Okay, so again, you have alleged an incredible amount here, and I just want to bring attention to one thing, and maybe I'm out of line here. The audience can kind of decide on this one, but I think it's really dishonest to try and compare Antifa to the KKK. Like, my dude, do you realize what type of a comparison, how insensitive of a comparison that is? Like the KKK as an organization, which is a centralized organization, mind you, it is a documented centralized organization. It has an internal structure and internal leadership. It is a centralized, well-documented organization that has committed an uncountable amount of murders through the history of the United States. The fact that you would compare Antifa, even if we were to accept, which I do not, but even if I were to accept that Antifa is some kind of violent, universally violent group, to compare them to the KKK just proves you don't take this conversation as seriously as you should. The KKK is one of the most heinous organizations in the history of the world. They lynched people, for fuck's sake.
So the Antifa,
are you for real with this?
They just murdered someone.
Wait. You can't. You keep interrupting me every time. You went on for 10 minutes, and then now you say I'm going on. But it's my turn. I can't believe you would make such a comparison. And to me, that seems like, again, another example of how willing you are to label somebody who you politically agree with totally hyperbolic language, which could justify all kinds of terrible things. Again, in the course of this conversation, you have yet to indicate any sort of downside that would be even close to coming to something like labeling someone a terrorist. We went to multiple wars over people that were labeled terrorists. Many millions of people have died over the war on terror. And you're going to try and equate that to Antifa, no matter how bad you think Antifa is. And I guarantee you that as bad as you think it is, I don't think that you have the facts to back that up. But even if you did, it would be absurd to compare that to the amount of deaths that have been dished out upon the world in the name of fighting terrorism, and the amount of deaths that have been dished out by the KKK. And the fact that you would do that should be offensive to everyone listening to this conversation. That's wild. That's so dishonest.
Wait, before we go on, I just wanted to clarify. I think from now on I'm gonna get a chess timer for my screen, which I'm gonna use to time people and see how long they're going. Just as a historical record, not to necessarily say, well, you only get this amount of time, but just as a historical record for the future. So I can get not so much shit from chat. But other than that, I just wanted to pose it to you since it was pretty probed. Rob, do you think it's a fair comparison?
Yeah, I would think that it's hilarious to hear someone make this sort of articulate how offended they are by this in defense of a group that likens Trump to Hitler. The entire group of Antifa is likening groups to the fascist Nazis.
I'm genuinely floored.
This is unbelievable. The virtue signaling is strong, though. I'll give you that. How dare you liken them to the KKK? How dare you liken them to the KKK? These Nazi Trump supporters, the fascist Trump supporters, they have American flags that complain about the teachers' unions, but you can't liken the KKK to Antifa, but certainly you could liken Trump and his supporters to the Nazis and Hitler. I mean, come on. This is a joke. It's just an absolute joke.
Excuse me. Please don't lie. Listen.
It's fine.
I would like
keep
to hear him
going.
finish.
Yeah, I'll keep going. Thank you. So I just think it's funny that so many people in Antifa do that. They want to say that, oh, you're against the teachers union, you're a fascist. But then at the same time, I wasn't saying that Antifa is exactly like the KKK. I said that if the KKK murdered someone, I wouldn't say, well, there are people in the KKK that don't. The argument that I used earlier was the label Nazi. Nazi, there isn't just a Nazi group now. There are groups that call themselves neo-Nazis. There are specific groups, subgroups that identify with an ideology of Nazism. Some of those groups may not advocate violence. For example, you had people like David Duke of the KKK that at one point was probably just for show because he's disgusting, but he was condemning violence. You see, Richard Spencer says, no, we don't want to use violence. I don't then say, oh, well then I don't want to label their group as using violence and intimidation because some of them have came out and said, well, we don't specifically endorse violence. Now, again, I've given specific examples, and we can see how the Black Bloc, that you still haven't answered the question, do you think that any Antifa organization that uses Black Bloc is in fact using violence, and therefore we could say they were using violence against civilian populations for political change?
Okay, I now have a chess clock open in another tab, so I'll be able to keep record of this just for chat. Okay,
sure,
wonderful. Yeah, Mama, you can start.
Again, God, I don't even know where to begin with this. Again, I'll note that you didn't answer Dylan's question about whether you think it's a fair comparison to compare the KKK to Antifa, which is by the way, a patently absurd comparison. Absolutely absurd. Not only is there no evidence that the amount of violence that any Antifa group, any associated Antifa group comes even close to the amount of horror the KKK has wreaked out upon this country. But the idea that you would even compare two groups, one which is a group that specifically and explicitly screams out about white supremacy, it is unbelievably out of touch. Let's just put it that way. And secondly, the idea that I think that you're engaging very dishonestly when discussing Black Bloc. And again, I think that this is another attempt at fear mongering and making it seem okay for you to label a group like terrorism. Black Bloc is not even it's not even what you're saying that it means. Black Bloc has nothing to do with violence. Black Bloc has to do with identification. Now, are there Black Bloc people who engage in violence? Sure. There are also many who do not. Black Bloc is a tactic that people use to prevent themselves from being identified by the state. And keep in mind that Black Bloc has been used in places where I bet you would agree with them. For example, the Hong Kong protests used Black Bloc because China was using surveillance to identify protesters and persecute them afterwards. So Black Bloc is not what you are trying to make it out to be. It's not like some secret tactic that's gone into to allow violence. It's for people to be able to protect their identity from a state who might oppose them, which is completely rational when you have a state that has been willing and openly and publicly, a matter of public record, mind you, engage in black bagging of protesters, for example.
Okay, so given that, oh, sorry, do I got the wrong thing up here? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I see my beautiful face.
How do I fix this? Ooh, 1 second. So I was trying to show. Can you give me the source then? I'll figure out how to stop that sharing. Can you give me then your source of your definition of what Black Bloc is? Because I have it straight from an actual website that was designed, that was linked by Rose City Antifa to describe exactly what Black Bloc is.
But you do realize that you're not countering anything. Black Bloc is something that has existed for a very long time. It's
right. So gear to bring, defensive gear, banners, shields,
wait. You asked me a question. Now you're just plowing over me.
Okay, so give me the source. Honest. That's what I asked. Can you have the source?
Yeah. Wait, there's a number of sources. Yeah, I don't have any single source that I'll pull off of. There's literally been documentation of protests going back to the civil rights movements. You can see Black Bloc. That's like saying, do you have a source for what a bird is? It's yeah, there are a lot of things that you could point to for that. I don't have anything on hand that states I will be completely honest.
That was the answer that was the
answer. Wait, but that's not the answer, because hold on a second. Because you're trying to use a single group's definition, which is not fair. That would be like me picking the Branch Davidians, offshoot of Christianity, and using their definition of religion, their definition of Christianity to define all of Christianity. You're being dishonest.
No, because
Listen,
here's what
hold
you
on,
could do. Here's what you could do in that situation. You could provide me evidence of something that was defining that in a different way to show that they didn't endorse violence. So it's real simple. If you're correct, you could provide me evidence that Black Bloc, a better source that says Black Bloc doesn't recommend things like spray paint, projectiles, slingshots, signs, flags on fixed poles, Molotov cocktails, bright lights to obscure camera vision during night actions, ladders, bolt cutters, communications equipment, banners, shields, steel-toed shoes, armor padding, gas masks, goggles, bandanas soaked in lime, etc. So
yeah, actually, I can actually, you know what? You're right. If you want specific things, I can point you to to exactly what I said, which is that there are so many sources that the idea that I would need to point to a single source about something that has been used across dozens upon dozens, I mean, literally hundreds of protests worldwide have used Black Bloc. Literally, please, just do me a favor, Rob, and go to the Black Bloc entry on Wikipedia and scroll down and see just how many books, articles, websites, or sites are cited in order to get an idea of what Black Bloc has been historically. Black Bloc is not just one single thing. You can't just go to Rose City Antifa's website, a group that you really seem fixated on, and just be like, oh, that is what all Black Bloc is. That is not only like that's historically ridiculous. That's like me saying that because like the Branch Davidians or something, or because some extreme Christian sect uses the Bible as a justification, that all people who touch the Bible are somehow wrong. That's a totally backwards way of reasoning. That's not how reasoning works. You can't just say, oh, well, Rose City Antifa, who, I don't know, from what I've heard of Rose City Antifa, they seem like they're pretty hardcore. I don't know, like their definition might be very different and is very different from many other people who've participated in, believed in, and theorized on Black Bloc. Your view of Black Bloc is a fantasy that's not based on reality. Just look at this. There is almost 100.
I wanna bring it back to Rob. You've had a decent amount of time to talk.
Good? Yeah. So, again, the point is the Antifa groups that are using this Black Bloc, we can see that in almost every single example, they're using the laser lights, they come with shields, they come with umbrellas, they use violence and intimidation, Molotov cocktails, they're throwing things the Rose City Antifa, the Black Bloc that they're referencing, talks about how you could take things like hammers that you're able to then break up concrete and throw it. We could see that this is used. I could go example after example of the Antifa groups that we see out and about that feel that they are justified in their fight against fascism, which they call the U.S. government fascist. They're justified in using violence. This is terrorism. They're using violence and intimidation to go after civilian populations to achieve political goals. So much to the point that we've actually had evidence of Black Lives Matter asking them to leave certain areas because they were trying to peacefully protest, but Antifa showed up and wanted to create violence. We see this occur over and over again. Now, as we see earlier, we could see that, I know that people are conflating and saying, oh, so then Rob must be defending fascism. No, this is a common tactic that we see on the left. If you call yourself an anti-fascist, then that must mean you're the good guy. But they behave in the most fascist type tactics. We could see from back in 2017 where they were hitting people with bike locks, stopping people from being able to see conservative speakers, mobbing people, constantly making sure that conservatives couldn't engage in peaceful rallies and things like that. We could see even in this conversation, we've had talk of the person who had firebombed an ICE facility and then was celebrated by the John Brown Gun Club and other Antifa organizations. We could see that, admittedly by Demon Mama, that the person, Jay Danielson, that was murdered, executed, whatever you want to call it, by a self-proclaimed Antifa member, that we saw then other Antifa people celebrate that. And again, what this will come down to is the last-ditch hope that we see from people on the left that say, but there could be an Antifa person out there that doesn't believe in this violence. Well, it doesn't matter, because what we can see is the Antifa people that actually do matter, the ones that are a terrorist organization, are the ones that are out there lighting fires, and we've had now over $2 billion of damage that have occurred in these riots. Over 40 people have died. We see in the Chaz zone that was led primarily by Antifa, for example, that the security in Chaz executed a 16-year-old African-American kid, and we actually have the audio of it where they shot at them, and then when they said, hey, they're still breathing, and then put 3 more bullets in the kid's head. Now, I don't know if that was specifically a member of Antifa, but it was done in an Antifa zone, and Antifa would not allow law enforcement in to be able to investigate that crime. We also have a letter from the Department of Homeland Security that just came out this week that was leaked that said that they now know that actually there's plenty of evidence that it's not Antifa being disparate, that they're actually organized in places like Portland, they're being financed, and they're using tactics that suggest that they're heavily organized. These tactics are clearly used to use violence and intimidation against the general populace, which proves that, once more, these are terrorist actions.
Okay, so again, it's just there's so much. You always make so many allegations. Everything from this thing that's like Chop is an Antifa zone, which is just not even accurate. I literally live in Seattle. That's not even accurate to the fact of like it's like that's so inaccurate. It's like it's almost hilarious as somebody who lives here. Like that's just absurd. Like that's such an absurd statement. Do you know how many? Do you know that? Do you even know where Chop was located? Can you tell me where it was located?
Seattle.
Yeah,
Capitol
Seattle.
Hill.
Where in Seattle?
Capitol Hill.
Capitol Hill. Do you know what Capitol Hill is?
I would assume that it's 6 city blocks in the city of Seattle.
Yeah, it's a residential neighborhood. There are a lot of people who lived within that area. The idea that CHOP was like some Antifa zone is ridiculous. There were so many people involved in CHOP, so many different factions that were involved in CHOP that when the police pulled out, there was people trying to figure out as best as they could the way to take care of the massive amount of homeless people that have been pushed out of their houses in this area. So you're, again, just like almost every single thing that's been happening in this conversation, you're trying to boil everything down to an incredibly simple black and white, oh, Antifa is some kind of terrorist group. And you motion to all of these individual things, which I don't even know. You could be making them up off the spot. We don't even know what examples you're talking about. And none of those even come to the argument that it would be fair to label Antifa a terrorist organization. Just out of curiosity, are you aware what the widely available statistics on terror in the United States have to say about anti-fascist violence? Are you aware that the government doesn't even list Antifa on the fucking top 25 groups that are a danger of terrorism in the United States? Are you aware that the number one group of dangerous terrorists in this country, literally higher than Al-Qaeda, is white supremacist extremists? That this was recently discussed. The FBI's own data.
Whoa, real quick.
Wait,
you have to be careful calling white supremacists terrorists. Don't you know that the word terrorism could be really bad? Don't you know that?
Hold on.
How could you say they're all terrorists?
You're trying right now, but what you're doing is you're not actually listening to the words that I'm saying, which I understand is fine if you want to just constantly continue in whatever worldview you have. But what I'm talking about is government designations. The government is currently run by Donald Trump. The FBI is not like some left-wing organization. They don't even list. Even the FBI won't label Antifa as a terrorist group. I'm sorry, but you're just making that up. And in fact, even let's say this. Let's say that we go with your very dishonest framing. I'll even grant you that we'll make the very, very unethical assumption that the conflict between the two people in Portland, I keep forgetting their names, but the conflict between those two people in Portland, we can even count that as an Antifa killing if you want to. I don't think that's fair. I think that's totally unbelievable, but I'll grant it to you. Do you know how many murders that would make for Antifa? By the way, this data is pulled from the federal government itself. How many murders that would make for Antifa in the last 25 years? Do you know?
If you'd like me to respond, I could start responding.
Well, I mean, I'm asking you a question and I stopped.
I don't know exactly what the federal government will say, but I have plenty to say on this issue.
That would make one. And this is from the federal government. This is from an organization that is willing to label people terrorists. And I am very reluctant to label people terrorists because I know what happens to people when they're labeled terrorists. When somebody is labeled a terrorist, our government has proven that in the past, certain actors in our government are but you ceded it back to me, are absolutely willing to engage in abject violence. The Iraq War was predicated on that.
1 second.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about that work stuff. First off, the idea that it's funny you bring this up at this area, the FBI. So I love that the left does this. On one hand, if I would cite the FBI statistics that show, for example, murder rates by age, population, gender, things like that, then we would say, oh, we can't trust the FBI, the police are corrupt. But when it comes to the FBI and talking about Antifa or talking about white ring violence, all of a sudden they're the end all be all and we have to talk about it. Yes, I'm aware of those statistics. I also know that the way the FBI categorizes this, they say that anytime a white racial group kills someone of a different race, they consider that right-wing terrorism. That's what they say, right? But they don't do the same.
Wouldn't that be? Isn't that right-wing terrorism?
What happened to the person that was reticent to label things terrorists? Now all of a sudden, you're more than happy to say.
I'm asking you by wait a second. I'm asking you by your definition. Wouldn't it be by your definition be terrorism if a white nationalist group killed a black person?
So if a group
that's your definition, I'm asking you.
Okay, sure. I would say that's terrorism. But then can you explain to me why the same FBI...
but then where's your argument?
Excuse me. If you let me finish, I'll tell you. Can you explain to me then why the same FBI doesn't equate when a black nationalist group or a black group kills a white person that's not considered...
Can I make my job really easier quick? Because I keep trying to DM people directly and message people directly, but my job's getting really hard. Okay, so here's 2 rules in chat. Okay, do not advocate for any violence against any individual in chat. If you do so, from this point on, you will be banned. And this is my rule. If you don't like it, too bad. I don't think it's productive for dialogue. If you misgender somebody going forward, you will get a warning and then a ban. If it's unclear that you didn't know, then that's what the warning's in place for. That's the policy going forward. If you don't like that, that's a problem. Don't care. I've already addressed it enough times in my chat before. I know there's if you want to talk to me about the policy afterwards, you can DM me on Discord. We can talk about it in private.
Okay.
To make continue. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem. That's important. Yeah, so the same FBI doesn't consider, for example, it will consider prison gangs. So if you have a white prison gang that kills a black person, I would consider that probably, that would fall in my definition of terrorism. Most likely, there could be, I could see the argument either way, but for the sake of this, I'd say yes. Why isn't it then when a black prison gang member kills a white person that's not considered black terrorism?
Well, actually, it's funny that you bring that up because if we're talking about pure the statistics that we're pulling off, the black supremacist extremists are actually listed in the moderate category of risk. So the idea that they don't is silly. They do. That is absolutely measured. It just, as it turns out, doesn't happen as frequently.
That's not true. For example, we could see then, and again, it comes down to then these colloquial definitions.
I can
you
literally give
Dylan, can you look at the time and see who's had what kind of time to talk?
You asked me something, and I'm responding.
I'll report on that. Demon Mama has had about 3 more minutes of time overall.
Thank you. So if you look, it's not just if we look at the FBI statistics, for example, we can see that there are far more murders and violent crimes that occur from the black community, the white community. It's just that the FBI chooses not to label them terrorism as often. And we could see clear examples of things that most undoubtedly look like hate crimes, like the black gentleman that was beating someone at Macy's because he alleged the N-word was said. That's oftentimes dropped or not considered a hate crime. We also see the FBI, it's a whole conversation that I think we'll be having tomorrow. The FBI was engaged in a coup against Donald Trump, so I really don't take the word of Christopher Wray that much. But if you do want to take the word of Christopher Wray, we could see what he said yesterday. Now, notice that you only talk about deaths, but you're not talking about damage. Can you show me the KKK or other groups in the recent past that were burning down cities? We can see now that the estimate of the damage that's occurred through these riots is $2 billion, and we've had over 40 deaths that have occurred as a result of these riots. That's just been in the past couple months. We can see Christopher Wray says that so I want to be clear, by describing it as an ideology movement, I don't mean to minimize the seriousness of the violences of the criminality that's going on across the country, talking about Antifa, some of which is attributable to people inspired by, or self-identify with that ideology movement. We focus on that. So, and all throughout this speech that he gave the other day, although he was, to your point, in fairness, unwilling to call them a group, which clearly we can see there are subsects of the groups, he did admit that there were subsects of groups that are engaged in terroristic behavior that identify as Antifa. So the idea then that we're going to say, well, that's not the case, that, somehow it's other groups. Again, we have a letter from the Department of Homeland Security, which I'll just read real briefly and then cede back my time, which says that the individuals are violently attacking federal facilities based on the ideology of Antifa. Violent Antifa anarchists inspired. We can't say any longer that this situation is opportunistic. Additionally, we have overwhelming intelligence regarding the ideology driving individuals towards violence and why the violence has continued. A core set of the threat actors are organized, show up night after night, share common tactics, and drawing on like-minded individuals and their cause. I recognize we might not be able to attribute every individual as VIAA. However, we need to look at the totality of intelligence, both current and previous, to recognize the motivation for violence and why people have shown up to commit this violence, and why the individual are using social media to encourage the Antifa on the ground to carry out acts of violence. Did I lose you?
Okay. I mean, I lost myself for a little bit there. Did I hear you correctly in saying that you believe that the FBI staged a coup against Donald Trump?
Yes.
Okay.
We
right.
know that
that's not. I know that's not the topic at hand, but
I will be hosting a conversation about that with Rob. That isn't actually tomorrow. That has been pushed back because someone had to cancel. We're trying to see if that can be next week.
Next week will be fine, but I'm busy the rest of this week, other than tomorrow night.
Got it. No problem.
Yeah.
I just feel like, again, this is another example of incredibly hyperbolic language to the point of almost, like, I would almost say, like, unethicality in claiming that Donald Trump, a president who still holds an incredible amount of power, was couped. Likewise, I would say that your allegations based on incredibly spurious data that Antifa is a terrorist organization, when the absolute best that you could bring to the table was Chris Wray saying, well, we need to look into it a little bit more. Just to me, it just seems very, very characteristic of a very dishonest approach to this topic. And again, while, like, we could talk about all kinds of different measures by which we could measure terroristic activity, I suppose. But again, I will point to the fact that under our current definitions, labeling someone a terrorist is incredibly dangerous and should be done so with the utmost care, which you have shown none of in this conversation. You have been willing to accuse Antifa as a whole, which is, mind you, the name of a set of beliefs, anti-fascism, as a terrorist organization. And no one, not even the sources you have cited, agree with you. The only people who have, in fact, it's really funny because people like Donald Trump himself, let me just give you a very specific example that we can have one off. Donald Trump accused a guy named Martin Gugino. Maybe you might remember him. He was from a very famous video out of, I think it was Buffalo, New York. A 70-year-old man who was pushed down by the police. Donald Trump went on the national news and accused him of being an Antifa provocateur with literally no evidence. There was no evidence that he was anything to do, that he even had anti-fascist beliefs. This guy was not Antifa, and it later came out that that had been completely fabricated off of nothing. Donald Trump just pulled that out of his ass and was willing to accuse a 70-year-old man who had been wronged by the police. An old man was pushed down and cracked his skull and suffered a traumatic brain injury. And Donald Trump was willing to use his platform on the national news to label this guy an Antifa provocateur. That is the exactly emblematic of what I've been talking about in this entire conversation. This willingness to engage in unbelievable hyperbole and not only that, but smearing groups together in the name of labeling them an enemy that we have traditionally pursued with lethal force. The war on terror has devastated millions of lives, both of Americans and beyond. So why on earth would you ever be so willing to be so careless with something like that? And would you not equally, why would you not denounce something like Donald Trump blatantly mislabeling an old man who was wronged, who was objectively wronged by the police, as an Antifa provocateur? How can you stand in the face of this and say that it's not hyperbolic to make comparisons between Antifa to the KKK, for God's sake? And then also to not only do that, but to try and undermine...
You've asked them a lot of questions. There's only so much one person can respond to.
That's fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, again, there's an incredible irony in organizations that want to liken anyone that they disagree with fascists and Nazis, talking about the dangers of mislabeling people. Again, we saw that someone, Jay Danielson, was just murdered in Portland, and then that murder was celebrated that evening by members of Antifa saying, we killed a fascist, we celebrate that. Yet you came on here cheerfully labeling people fascist if they are against teachers' unions and have too many flags up and things like that. So that's what you said. Those were examples of fascism, of hyper-nationalism and fascism. That's exactly what you
actually, I would love people to just go back and watch the VOD. What I actually said was that these were examples of hyper-patriotism, and they can represent a stream or a current of fascism that's running in our country.
So you liken the actions, right? So you make comparisons. That,
but that's very
that's
different,
exactly
though.
what you did.
But that's
apparently
very
you don't
different,
think that's dangerous. Then you go on, you have plenty of time to tell.
We do gotta let him respond. You're like you got 5 minutes on the clock on him.
I mean, and like you constantly do this. You say saying someone executed someone is bad because they're innocent until proven guilty. Then 30 seconds later you say, oh, but the police executed someone, as if they're not innocent until proven guilty. You say that it's bad to call people terrorists. Then you go right off and say, look at all of these white nationalist terrorists, thereby labeling them. this was a point I actually was trying, I assumed I would agree with you, actually. I think that white nationalists are terrorists. This was a point I thought we could agree on, that when I asked you earlier, I said, do you think Nazis are terrorists? You said, well, I'd be careful to label them that. And then you proceed to go on and do just that later in the conversation. So you seem to have no qualms about making those justifications and those labels. So it just seems odd to me how you'll willingly, like, you get in this high horse and say, how dare you label people terrorists? Now, as to what happened to that old man specifically, yeah, I thought that that was really bad. And I thought that Trump was wrong to come out and assume motive to him without having proof of it. That's certainly something that's wrong. That's something that we should condemn Trump for, and I did. Now, was that old man, like, it wasn't as heinous as some people thought. He was pushed, but it wasn't like he was brutally attacked. I still thought it was bad, and I thought those officers should have been reprimanded for it, though. Now, having said that, and again, the question that lies before us is, as I said about 40 minutes ago, what we'll end up seeing is you're going to have to lay on the fact that, well, okay, although we see the Antifa group in Portland that's running the show there, Rose City Antifa, yeah, they're engaged in violence, and that would, by the definition, meet the definition of terrorism. And the John Brown Gun Club, yeah, that's invasion violence, and that would be terrorism. And these other Antifa groups that engaged in black blocs that are doing things like intentionally shining lasers into police officers' eyes to blind them, firebombing police stations, using bricks and weapons and slingshots, spike strips, things like that. All of those things are violence and intimidation of a civilian population to achieve a political end. But you just default back to, well, but there could be Antifa organizations out there that aren't embracing this violence. You say that you know a lot of them, but you haven't showed me any examples of them saying, oh, by the way, we don't engage in violence whatsoever. You just said, well, there was a group called an anti-fascist committee that Einstein was a member of back the day, and that was Antifa. They didn't call themselves Antifa. Maybe they did. I'm willing to see proof of that. But again, we're talking about Antifa the way that it's known, with the symbolism that's engaged with the original German group that they were inspired by, the anti-fascist group, that, by the way, was largely responsible for the rise of Nazism, because they too terrorized anyone that they deemed fascist, primarily capitalists, and through that terrorism, it encouraged people to be willing to side with the Nazis, because the Nazis actually fought back against the anti-fascista. So it was two horrible organizations engaged in mutual combat that forced people to make a horrible, terrible decision to join with one of these two groups. But what we can see is all this violence that's occurring. And again, I'm not saying that everyone that says, hey, I identify with Antifa is a terrorist. Just like I'm not saying that everyone that says, I identify with Richard Spencer's group in the alt-right is a terrorist. But they are engaged in an organization that they know use violent tactics and have harmed people and have killed people. And they are willfully engaged in that. So they might not themselves be willing to engage in that violence, but they're supporting a group that does. And we need to be able to call out these tactics because they've been so destructive, caused over $2 billion worth of damage, primarily to inner city people of color neighborhoods, and it's absolutely disgusting. This organization needs to be called out. I provided evidence that they are in fact organized, as the Department of Homeland Security private messages have been released that show. I've shown an example of Antifa in their own words, celebrating heinous acts of murder, heinous acts of attacking ICE facilities, and things like that. And the fact that you just default to not being able to defend any of that and just saying, well, it's bad to call people terrorists.
Rob,
sure.
I do want to go back. You've been going for exactly 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's fine. Fair.
I do want to turn it back to you,
yeah.
Mama.
Yeah, I just want to be like, this is just a side thing. I'm not going to really make an argument off of this yet, but can I just be clear in that, did you not just say that, that the anti-fascists in Nazi Germany were a horrible organization? Did you equivocate between the Nazis and the anti-fascists in Germany?
No, I accurately depicted what would happen, that they helped lead to the rise of the Nazis by attacking innocent civilians, which then allowed the Nazis to obtain power.
You're blaming a group of Jews for the rise of the Nazis.
I
just want to be charitable.
No, I'm talking about history. And I'm saying that because there was an organization, and it wasn't all Jews, that were violently attacking civilians, it allowed Hitler to use that as an excuse to get civilians on his side. If you want to ignore history to virtue signal, that's fine, but that's the truth of what happened.
Wait. You're alleging that a group of, by the way, historically it was largely Jewish, fighting against the rounding up of their people by the Nazi regime was somehow contributed to the rise of fascism and Nazism? Like, to me that just seems like, I mean, I don't know, like that does sound like you're blaming the victims of Nazism for the rise of Nazism.
Again, this is equivalency that we see constantly from the left. It's like saying, well, in Charlottesville, the Antifa were the good guys. No, they were bad as well. That doesn't justify the behavior of the Nazis. It was a tactic.
Would you say that, like, would you say then that like Jewish people who resisted, are you saying that Jewish people who resisted being put into concentration camps were bad because they fought back?
No. I'm saying that the organization of anti-fascist Germany that started attacking innocent civilians that had nothing to do with Nazism allowed the Nazis to approach those.
When did they attack innocent civilians?
That was one of the starts they got. They were communists. They were violent communists, and the Nazis rose to power in an
all
attempt
of my
to fight
research of
communism.
this group. I've never heard of them doing attacks against civilians. They were particularly struggling against the Nazi Party specifically. Like that was why they were founded that way. They were struggling against the rising Nazi Party in Germany.
I've read books on this. I don't have them in front of me.
To me, like it sounds like right now you're willing to step in this like pile of like like blaming the rise of Hitler on Jewish people who fought against Hitler. And to me, that just seems like, again, another example of you just like being willing to engage in whatever to avoid admitting that you've gone way too far and trying to label a group as a terrorist organization. And again, you made a number of repeated claims about whether there's been this amount of damage or whatever or whatnot, but none of those I've not seen any statistics that even would bear out to prove that would be a terrorist organization. In fact, I have like literally right here I have the statistics from at least as recent as I could get during the BLM protests of dozens and dozens of federal arrests. None of them were charged with being members of a group. None of them were found to be tied to any group called Antifa or anti-fascism. Most of these federal charges were people who engaged in independent looting or violent behavior that was motivated by themselves. And while there may be some group in a place like perhaps you could point to Rose City Antifa. I don't know enough about the specifics of their organization. I certainly wouldn't feel comfortable labeling them a terrorist organization offhandedly. But maybe you could point to them and say, hey, maybe this group is engaging in some tactics that are reprehensible. That doesn't mean that everyone else who does. Again, you have the same problem of conflating an entire belief system that has an unbelievably rich history with many different groups, including the one that I cited, like that Albert Einstein belonged to, that throughout history have represented all walks of life and many different creeds. Their one uniting principle is that they disagree with the rise of fascism, and they find fascism uniquely dangerous. Also, you've accused me a couple of times in your previous rant of doing things that I didn't do, and I just urge people, please go watch the VOD. I promise you that you will find that none of those allegations are true. I never once made a spurious claim of fascism, nor do I think that accusing somebody of being fascistic or having fascistic tendencies is even close to the same as trying to label an entire creed a terrorist organization.
I do want to let Rob respond to this, and then we're going to go into ending statements.
Sure. So again, you see the conflation. This is a classic tactic that you see from a lot of people that want to be perpetual victims, that they're unable to. This is exactly what we saw at Charlottesville. So, for example, they say, well, Richard Spencer and his group, which I agree are incredibly heinous, are bad. Therefore, the other people engaged on violence on the other side must be good people, citing statistical facts about the fact that we could see that a lot of the abusive behavior that was coming from the anti-fascist group that was directed at civilians and not just to government agents is one of the strategies that allowed the Nazis to obtain the kind of power that they got through the civilians. By the same token, we could see that when Richard Spencer was actually asked what were some of the best organizations, then some tactics that he had for recruiting people, he talked specifically about violent action by mob mentality on the left, such as violent people in Black Lives Matter and violent people in Antifa. This doesn't mean that I'm blaming left-wingers for the heinous actions of Richard Spencer. To the contrary, I'm just talking about a fact that shows that this was a recruiting tactic that was used by people on the other side. When we see extremists from one side, there is a horseshoe effect, which leads to more extremism for the other side. Right now, the only extremism that's been given institutional credence is those in groups like Antifa, that where you saw these riots occurring over and over, and people that would argue on the side of Demon Mama said, what riots? There's no riots occurring here, until they saw the internal polling showed that it actually wasn't popular among people, and then they said, oh, it must be Trump supporters. Now, again, I provided in the chat links, about 9-10 links. You keep saying you're not providing evidence. I have. I have all sorts of like Rose City Antifa, New York City Antifa, Atlanta Antifa, almost all of the cities where riots were occurring. You could see in real time on Twitter riots being directed by people with those social media accounts. For example, there's also a flyer here that talks specifically about the idea. It says, look out for fascism entryism at BLM protests. This is from AtlantaRiseUp.net. It was provided on over 7 Antifa Twitter accounts that I saw that talked about the need that this is not white supremacists causing the protests or riots. It's actually Antifa. They say that white supremacists may have showed up, but these are being led by Antifa and other groups. The link was provided in the chat. There was all sorts of other things in real time showing Antifa directing these attacks. This is going on, and I understand that a lot of people on the left don't want to accept this, and they want to say, no. If the FBI didn't declare that they were in a group, again, I released the evidence from the Department of Homeland Security that says that they understand that this is organized and coming from groups like Antifa. We can no longer say that they're disorganized. The fact that many of them may have not received federal charges right now, I wonder if they start to get federal charges in the future, will then Demon Mama come back and say, I was wrong, Antifa was engaged in terrorist opportunities. And we could see all over the place how these people in Antifa engaged in Black Bloc are engaged in terrorist activities. Again, I go back, and then we'll get to the closing comments, to what I said about an hour ago, which was, you'll just be left to say, well, there are people that are defending these violent terrorists that aren't violent terrorists themselves, so you can't call everyone in Antifa terrorists. But the ones that matter and that are actually burning down our cities are Antifa. They are terrorists, and I hope that the federal government starts to go after them as they should.
Okay, I am going to do something that I hope goes well. Since it is any statements, I think I can do it. I need to use the bathroom horribly, so I'm going to throw it first over to... does anybody want to particularly go first? Anyone want to...
It doesn't matter to me.
Okay, then Rob, I'm going to have you go first. So you can, since you've already got the momentum, you can just keep the ball rolling, and then I'll throw it over to Demon Mama.
Around 5 minutes? Yeah, it's fair enough.
5 minutes is as long as it can be.
Okay, so what we end up seeing throughout this debate is something that I think you see a lot of techniques. Now, I'll fully concede the position of this, that I can't say that every single person that says that they associate with Antifa is themselves a terrorist. That doesn't mean that the group's not a terrorist group. By the same token, I can't say that every single person that calls themselves a white nationalist is a terrorist, but it is still a terrorist group because the people that are running these organizations embrace violence. We know that the original anti-fascista movement was a group that embraced violence. We could see that the problem with this, as Demon Mama showed us quite clearly, is that we can't even define exactly what fascism is. You end up saying things like, well, it's hyper-nationalism. And then I'm like, well, what's hyper-nationalism? Well, it's exceptionalism. So anyone that thinks their country is exceptional, well, no. Like, a good example would be at the RNC. We saw all the American flags and them talking about the teachers' unions being terrible. I've also showed evidence from Rose City Antifa's page, which again is the biggest Antifa organization in Portland, which has been rioting for about 100 days now. I showed how they define fascism as all sorts of things like being against communism and other things such as that you could literally then insert whoever you perceive as an enemy as a fascism. You can see all through the chat of Dylan's chat, people saying Rob must be a fascist, Rob must be a Nazi, Trump must be a fascist. These are words that are thrown around that are then used to justify violence against them. You can see that Demon Mama understands how labeling someone like that could be dangerous because she makes a big point of saying, oh, if you label a group terrorist, well, then bad things could happen to them. Yet then she proceeds to go on and label certain groups terrorist and doesn't care about it, thereby breaking. The same with the word execution. She had a problem with me saying execution, and then 5 seconds later talks about how the police execute people while admitting that she doesn't have evidence. She doesn't have all the evidence in front of her yet. So you can see how they understand the fact that you just call people fascists. And this is something that goes back to the conversation of, is it okay to punch a Nazi? No, it's not. This is another Antifa mentality. And the reason it's not is it's only okay to punch someone if they're offering physical violence to you at that moment and you are defending yourself. Because once you say it's okay to punch a fascist or a Nazi, it's a quick step away from saying everyone I disagree with is a fascist or a Nazi. Or, oh, you're behaving in behaviors that are fascist tangent. You have the American flag up there. You're supporting Trump. You're against communists. You're against the teachers' unions. These sorts of things are what lead to the mass violence that we see. Again, we can see that the majority of this violence has occurred in inner city neighborhoods. There wasn't one word mentioned about the fact that I've actually showed that there were Black Lives Matter organizations and people that associate with them, or people that just associated with peaceful protests, asking Antifa people to stop coming into people of color's communities and riotings. We've seen from the Department of Homeland Security that they now say that it appears that Antifa organizations in places like Portland are organized. We see that $2 billion of damage was done in these organizations. We even see that Christopher Wray the other day admitted that although he's unwilling to say that there is a totalitarian group named Antifa, there are certainly subsect groups called Antifa that are engaged in terroristic type behaviors, organized behaviors targeting civilians to achieve political gains. We saw the games that were played by Demon Mama saying, well, we can't really use that definition of terrorism. We have to use a different definition for this and that. All you need to do is open your eyes and see that these organizations are out there. They're engaged in Black Bloc tactics, which the John Brown Gun Club, Atlanta Antifa, New York City Antifa, Rose City Antifa, and all these groups talk about the need to bring weapons, slingshots, Molotov cocktails, lasers that could damage people's eyes. You can see the videos of them constantly doing things like having umbrellas and demanding that people not record them as they engage in their violent terroristic behavior. And again, I'm willing to prove that I can't say that every single person that associates with the group Antifa is a terrorist, but we can see that the vast majority of these subsects that are engaged in the rioting around the country right now are in fact engaged in terrorist behavior. And if the other side wants to hang their hat on, well, there could be a few Antifa people out there that aren't terrorists, then I'm more than willing to leave them hang their hat on that. Lastly, groups, they try to play this colloquial game or semantic game where they say things like, well, if you call yourself anti-fascist like Einstein did, then clearly that means he was a member of Antifa, and that's an example of an Antifa group. No one's saying that a group like that clearly wasn't engaged in Black Bloc, going out and damaging people, attacking police, lighting fires, attacking people in communities of people of color, leading to over 40 people dying in the resulting riots. No one's saying that people like that say, well, yes, I'm against fascism, are terrorists. I'm saying that the groups that call themselves Antifa, that wear the symbols of Antifa, that engage in the activities of Black Bloc that we see Antifa using, are in fact terrorists, and they should be treated as such, and I hope that they all face the consequences they deserve. When we start to see the federal government in places like Portland come on and arrest them because local prosecutors are unwilling to allow these people to go to prison as they should and instead leave them out night after night, then we'll start to see that this sort of terrorist behavior will start to be curbed. Lastly, never forget, no matter what is said here, we have two examples of Antifa. Even as heinous as other groups are, I didn't see the celebration of people being murdered in the street like I saw it from Antifa. The fact that these groups were defended by people in the mainstream media, and we actually have people like mayors and prosecutors that are letting them out without bail, shows how dangerous and disgusting this particular form of terrorism is, which is using using violence and intimidation to achieve political goals, the definition of terrorism.
Okay, cool. I let you go over a little bit over 5 minutes so you could wrap it up. It's okay. It's okay. You were going through it. It's all good. It's just now I just got to make sure I definitely give that to Demon Mama if she goes a little bit over. Demon Mama, you got 5 minutes.
All right. So, yeah, there was a lot to address there. First of all, throughout this entire conversation, there has been a very, very careless conflation of terms from everything from calling. You've labeled every time you've brought up protest, you've labeled them as riots, even though we have explicit evidence proving that not even 10% of the BLM protests that have occurred in the last 6 months have been labeled as violent or even as riots. So your constant conflation of that just betrays that you're not actually being honest with what reality actually has for us. That a vast majority of these protests are completely peaceful. A vast majority of anti-fascist demonstrations are peaceful, and even if there are small groups of Antifa, which is, again, this is according to the resources that have been provided to us by the government itself. The government who, is the one who dishes out the arrests on them. The federal government, mind you, who is also responsible for black bagging them, that even their data doesn't actually show that there's any large-scale organization of anti-fascists. That anti-fascists tend to be a distributed group of individuals who all oppose fascism, but do so in very different ways. I think it's really dishonest to try and downplay the fact that Albert Einstein, again, was literally belonged to an anti-fascist group that still exists to this day, that was explicitly devoted, one of the most famous anti-fascist groups in history, was explicitly devoted to nonviolent methods of fighting fascism. And I also find it very strange. I've got to say, I find it really, really dishonest and really strange to make comparisons between Antifa, a group that if we're going to be very, very charitable to Rob's position, may have killed one person in the past 25 years to the KKK, a group that ran a terror, a complete reign of terror over most of the southern states. Whether you want to call them a terrorist organization or not doesn't matter. The comparison between those two organizations is just completely out of left field. And then to then go on and imply that Jewish anti-fascists in World War II era Germany were somehow responsible for the rise of Hitler is just, oh my God, I can't even believe he'd be willing to say that. That's just like, holy shit. That's like so victim blaming. But on top of that, we can talk about a whole number of things. You've refused to acknowledge the fact that many currently active anti-fascist groups are definitively devoted to nonviolent means. For example, the hundreds of mutual aid groups that exist across the United States, whose main purpose is not even to be involved in protest, but rather to provide for the material conditions of the people on the ground, delivering groceries. Something that I have worked with other people who consider themselves anti-fascists. I've worked with them to deliver groceries to hungry mouths. This is what a lot of anti-fascist groups do across this country. You're willing to roll them up and label them all terrorists. Mind you that this question, the original question and the one that you refuse to cede, although I think you should rationally cede the point, is that Antifa is not a terrorist organization. You've been willing to stand by both the idea that it's an organization, which has been proved objectively false, and secondly, that it's a terrorist organization. Every single piece of evidence that we've brought up here has shown that they are not an organization, even if individual members of Antifa at some point have done something wrong. We would not apply this standard to any other group. We would not apply this to Christians. There have been many Christians in throughout history who have involved themselves in things that your definition of terrorism would be considered terrorism, but we would not label Christians as terrorists. Likewise, why the hell would we label an entire creed of people, the anti-fascist movement, a again rich and colorful and fascinating historical political movement, all as terrorists because some people who happen to buy into that creed did something wrong. Again, it's this really strange thing that really reminds me of when Trump, sort of spuriously accused a 70-year-old man who was the victim of police brutality of being an Antifa provocateur, because that means he can hand wave it. Oh, it's okay. The police were just beating up an Antifa guy. It's weird that the same exact tactics that you are supposedly railing against are being used right now by the president and yourself to label a rich group with many different people all over the country. Some groups are more centralized than others. Many are not centralized at all. Some people are just individual anti-fascists. And you're willing to say, yeah, this is a domestic terrorist organization, knowing what we do to terrorist organizations. To me, that is beyond irresponsible. It is beyond any sort of responsibility. And I also note that in your desperation, and I again allege, anybody go pop to the beginning of the VOD to see if this is true. You allege that I was spuriously accusing people of being fascist when that's explicitly not what I said. Fascism is a historical movement that has been incredibly well documented. In fact, the rise of fascism in Europe is perhaps one of the most traumatic events that has ever occurred in human history. And it has affected us for years. There are people who today who still lived during the time of concentration camps in Nazi Germany. So to downplay that is just completely silly to me. Again, Antifa is a political movement, and the idea that you can just add the name Antifa and say that all of the anti-fascist groups that influence this anti-fascist thought are just somehow don't count is just off the wall to me. So you failed to point out that whether it's organization, you failed to make a meaningful case as to whether it's a terrorist organization, and you've spent most of this time trying to point at random things that you think make Antifa look bad when all they do is make an individual or a person bad, which I will agree with perfectly. It's rational to denounce somebody when they do something bad. What it's not rational to do is to accuse an entire group of being a terrorist organization in the age of the war on terror, which has claimed the lives of countless Americans, Iraqis, Afghanistani people all over the fucking world. So okay. I just feel like your entire position is one of pure propaganda. And that has been proved in this conversation. Okay, we can wrap it up. We've both had plenty of time to talk and plenty of time to put into our ending statements to address everything that's been said.
Hey, I'm back. So, yeah, just got back. Let me make sure my audio is working. But yeah, that was the debate from the other night, and just pleasantries at the end there. So what did you all think? I guess I would ask you if you thought that I won that debate. There were parts I could have done better. But understand, it's really frustrating trying to enter something like that in good faith. There's three things that you see happen that makes it frustrating. First is what I call like a lack of acknowledging reality. So you could debate someone in good faith and still acknowledge reality, but we have to pretend, for example, things that she claimed there was like the Chaz Zone was to help homeless people. The murder of Jay Danielson was, well, that could have been self-defense. We don't know. And things like that. When you see that that's the area that they're approaching this from, I mean, I could have made her case better than she did. I could have said, look, and this is something that, again, I said throughout the debate, but this is true, right? I can't prove that everyone that would claim that they are Antifa is a terrorist. Just like I can't prove that everyone that says they're a white supremacist is a terrorist. But that doesn't mean that we don't look at like the group of Nazis. There's not a specific group named Nazi. There are neo-Nazis, 3%ers, etc. Just because they're not calling themselves Nazi, we could say Nazi groups are terrorist groups. And that's overarchingly true. I can't prove that every single person in those groups is a terrorist. But we're talking about the groups and the way that they're ran, and that's what we see. So she could have focused her time on that point, and that would have been fair. But the fact that she has to argue every single point. Oh, no, that death wasn't... Oh, executions only when the cops kill people. Oh, fascist, hyper-nationalism's like having a bunch of American flags and every single thing. Like, just, you don't see me waffling like that. I make a point, I stick to it. So that's the first thing. It's hard when people aren't engaged in... And this happens in almost every one of these debates I do. They just deny the actual reality, and then you have to spend half your time being like, okay, here's what literally happened. And it just deflates. The entire point of debating someone like this is her strategy going in is quite simple. I'm going to deflect, and then at the end tell all of my viewers, see, he didn't prove his case. Because you just deflected the whole time and didn't talk about anything of substance. So that's the first tactic they use. The second tactic is the constant interruptions. I was told... I didn't read a lot of the chat on Dylan's feed that are majoritarily left-wingers. They thought that I got crushed, and clearly Antifa's not a terror group. That's what their takeaway was. And they thought, that I must be a Nazi or a fascist was something, thereby proving my point. And they also said that they thought I was ridiculous when I called her out for interrupting me. But it's hard, no matter how well thought out and planned you are, to actually be able to make, like, I had notes and I was prepared to debate, but when someone, every 3 words you say something, wait a minute, 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 and it's just taking it, like, somewhere. I mean, it was real simple. I thought the discussion would go something like this, and I said, like, okay, she would claim that the only thing that connects Antifa is the fact that they're anti-fascist. So the first thing we need to do is get a definition of what fascism is. She wouldn't give me a definition of fascism. She wouldn't give me a definition of terrorism. That's all it was. Just, and you can see her final point she's making. In the age of the war on terror, we can't call people terrorists, says the people that are calling everyone fascist Nazis. I mean, it's just absurd. So that's the second thing. And the third thing she does is exactly that. This virtue signaling to, oh, you're an immoral person. To even call someone a terrorist makes you immoral. And this point is so laughable, and to me, I was chuckling the most about this. I mean, you think about someone getting upset if you call them a terrorist when they spend their entire livelihood calling you a racist, fascist, or a Nazi. So they don't have a problem with that. They could label you as a racist or a fascist or a Nazi. Totally fine. But if you look at someone firebombing a police building or attacking and killing someone as they're looting a television set, or shooting people on the streets and then celebrating it because of who they support politically, you can't call them a terrorist. Oh, no. Let me read the... Oh, yeah, I hear you, Jim. A lot of people... And it's tough. It's tough to even stick around in those debates because it's like, it's clear this isn't in good faith. So I had plenty more to bring up, but I can't even get my foot in the door because it's just this constant deflection. And one thing I do regret is I wish I would have kept my head more, and it's something I need to learn to do better. But I think that a lot of that, even though I really like Dylan as a moderator, I think he did not do a very good job as a moderator early in this debate, where he continually allowed her to interrupt me. Once he started keeping time, I think he could see, like, oh, she's literally talked for 5 minutes straight and you haven't had a chance to talk. Things like that. Yeah, and so politic account, I'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, I thought that I did a good job as well, but I could have done better. But that's true of any time I debate someone. I think I could always do better. But I think that most objective people, again, and let me make her point for her clearly, I do think that you could say, I have a friend who thinks that he's an Antifa, He doesn't march with them or do the Black Bloc or anything like that, but he's fervent that he's an anti-fascist, so he identifies as Antifa. I don't think he's a terrorist. But that's just like saying, well, I have a skinhead friend. He's again, and I made the point in the debate. You used to have David Duke when he took over the KKK, who talked about, oh, we're nonviolent now. We're just approaching situations politically and through voting and things like that. But that doesn't mean that the white nationalists that are out there killing people, that we could say, well, we can't call them terrorists now because David Duke's a white nationalist and he doesn't. Of course not. Of course we would say, well. And notice, by the way, she had no problem then accusing white nationalists of being terrorists. You know, so that's nonsense. And this is just an attempt to virtue signal and make, yeah, I can't believe you would do that. I'm so insulted. I'm so insulted that you would flippantly use the word terrorist. Now, a point that I think that was crucial where she lost the debate, and of course she deflected from it because when she's admitting that Al-Qaeda are terrorists, and if Al-Qaeda firebombed a police precinct, that would be an act of terrorism. And then I'm like, okay, well, if someone firebombed a police precinct for other reasons, for political motivation, how is that not an act of terrorism? And of course, she had to deflect and never answered it and started going, 50 different directions, which was ridiculous. But that's exactly the mentality that we're looking at that's so dangerous. Again, the things that make Antifa and Black Lives Matter and their terrorist approach so dangerous isn't the fact that they are terrorists, which is bad enough, but it's the fact that they have institutional support. For example, corporations, media people, politicians. No one defended Richard Spencer's group when they killed Heather Heyer. At least no one of prominence, no one in any institutional power. You didn't see all of a sudden Nike having, slogans up there defending Richard Spencer, or Don Lemon and people on the media defending Richard Spencer's group, or Republican politicians defending them. Everyone said it was heinous. Yet that's exactly what we see with Antifa. Academia, Silicon Valley, the entertainment industry, media people, politicians. They've all defended Antifa or ignored for them. Yes, she did say she did say Einstein was an Antifa member, which is laughable. So that's the first point that I really wanted to make was she admits that this is terrorist activity, that it could be considered terrorism to firebomb a police precinct or to burn down a neighborhood for political reasons. But then as soon as you're like, okay, well, that's what Antifa did, she's like, no. And the reason is, not just because the danger is because they have this institutional power, but it's the part that I was making, and you could see that she does this herself. Whereas they just call fascism whatever they hate. Now, for example, I think that a lot of the Democratic politicians are horrible people that want the destruction of this country. I would call someone firebombing those house, like a Democrat's house, I would call that out as despicable and say that was an act of terrorism. I have no problem saying that. I would like that. I'm not going to waffle like she did. And that's how you could tell that they're being dishonest. Yes, I admit firebombing police precinct, that would be terrorism. Oh, unless someone I ideologically agree with does it. Now, wait. Now we have to be hesitant to call it terrorism. Cypher, I don't know if you're saying she's neither a woman or a man. Look, my policy on this, like, I could talk about trans issues someday if you want. When I'm trying to debate someone, I'm trying to call them the pronouns they want, period. That's it. It's that simple. I don't need to get into a separate debate that has nothing to do with the topic at hand. So she wants to be called she, I call her she. Nope, that's it. That's as far as I go with that ideology. Let me check out some of the other. So one, she concedes right out of the bat. Oh, yeah. If you're firebombing things like that, that's an act of terrorism. Oh, except if my group does it. And notice how when she defined fascism, she's like, well, it could be being hyper-patriotic. You want to see an example? Like the RNC. She talked about American exceptionalism being an example of fascism. So if you think America is the greatest country in the world, that's hyper-nationalism and possible fascism. She talks about having too many American flags is hyper-nationalism. She talks about criticizing the teachers' unions. And by the way, I'll get to in a second here. I did this on my summary the other night. I won't take this too long, but I did this on my summary the other night. Anti-fascist Action, the original Antifa group that came out of Germany, they labeled, to them, fascism was capitalism. In fact, they aligned with the Nazis against the Social Democrats in Germany because they thought fighting capitalism was more important than fighting Nazism. So to them, fascism was capitalism. And I'll be able to prove that. I'll show you the source here in a moment. Now, of course, ironic, she's defending a group that allied itself with Nazis and then later fought Nazis, but then says that I'm horrible and hate Jewish people for correctly calling out the horrors of Antifa and how they started. Oh, okay, sorry, Cypher. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, sorry, sometimes I don't get the whole context of what's going on in chat. So, one, she admits that bombing things would be terrorism, but she says it's okay. And then she leaves open the definition to label anyone she disagrees with fascist. She thinks Trump's fascist. She didn't answer if she thinks Trump supporters are fascist. But, okay, whatever. The other area that I think she loses this debate quite clearly is this. Like, ultimately, it's the same with Black Lives Matter. Like, if you're this group, think about it this way. Let's say there's 27 people on different platforms watching me right now, according to my little counter. Let's say that all of us are conservative. I don't know if that's the case, but let's say it would be true. And we all form a Tea Party movement, right? We call ourselves a Tea Party. Or we say we're a branch of the Freedom Caucus. Whatever. We form an NRA group, an NRA offshoot, okay? Whatever, one of those groups. We'll just go with the Tea Party. We'll say we form our own chapter of the Tea Party. Internet Content Creators Tea Party group. And we have, whatever. We don't have a leader, but we hang out and we talk about, we go to rallies. We do things like that, right? We're not violent. We're not doing anything like that. Now, say that all throughout the country, there's like 12 other separate groups that call themselves Tea Party groups, and they start firebombing a bunch of buildings and killing people, beating people, stopping left-wing people from gathering in public, right? It would be incumbent on me at that point, when there's so much violence being done in the name of a group that I associate with, it would be incumbent upon us to say, whoa. No. We completely denounce this violence. That is not what we're about. I'm not saying one incident. If one person who happened to be in the Tea Party goes and does something heinous, that's one thing. But we're talking riots, night after night after night after night after night, all around the country. So when Demon Mama makes the claim, and I'm sure she does know Antifa groups more personally than I do. I'm sure she does. She lives in Seattle. So when she's like, I know these Antifa groups that are nonviolent, that are against violence. And I'm like, cool, can you provide me a link to their statement on that? No, I can't. That's easy. It'd be real simple. Show me a bunch of people with the Antifa symbol and the black clad, whatever, that are out there that are like, no, we deplore this violence. We don't think that you should be enacting violence against the police. We don't think you should be engaged in violence against these communities. Show me that. That would go a long way to proving your point. I'd be like, okay, that's fair enough. That group sounds like a group that's not a terrorist group. And even though I think the majority of Antifa is terrorist, clearly this group that's condemning the violence isn't. But she couldn't provide one example. And this is someone who deeply knows these groups. Reading the chat here real quick. But you see, like, it'd be like if someone said to me, all Republicans are terrorists, I would be able to quite clearly point out many examples of Republicans being like, we condemn political violence. Easy. Like that. No problem. She can't provide one example. I didn't know you would come in with this gotcha moment. Gotcha moment, it's her entire argument. There are groups that call themselves Antifa that aren't endorsing this violence. Okay, show me. Well, I can't. Okay? So there you see, those two concessions to me are just damning. And again, I go back to the point that I made in my closing statements. I could have done it better, but it was impossible to get. She keeps saying, like, notice how she just deflects. Rob hasn't proven that their group haven't proven anything. Did you see the little on the side, all the links I was sending her that she refused to look at? John Brown Gun Club in Puget Sound, Rose City Antifa in Portland, Atlanta Antifa, New York City Antifa. I was listing all of these groups from their own websites or social media accounts, recommending violence and rioting, and she's like, you haven't proven that they're a group. I showed emails from the Department of Homeland Security. I showed from FBI Director Christopher Wray saying, and he's even on her side, he doesn't think Antifa is a big organization. He thinks that it's small groups that are identifying as Antifa. And so that's the argument I went with. I was like, at the end of the day, you might, if your argument's going to be, well, I consider Antifa an ideology, and you can't say everyone who embraces an ideology is a terrorist, I will concede that I can't prove that everyone who would call themselves Antifa is a terrorist. But I can show you the groups that identify as Antifa that we see in all of these cities are terrorists. That's what I can prove. And I said, that's fine. If you want to hang your hat on the idea of, but there could theoretically be an Antifa organization out there that's not terrorist, even though all the ones that we can see and name are terrorists, that's fine. I'll take that. So let me show you just real quick. Give me one. Can you hear me? Yeah, I think you should be able to hear me. So let me look this up for you. And you can see all these links that I'm sending her on the side? You see that? I'm guessing she didn't open one of those. Not one. She just says, you haven't proven your case, you haven't proven your case. Well, it's irrelevant. So this point she makes at the end, and I did do this the other night, but I'd read a book on this, but I can't find the book right now. I don't have it on me. I think I got it from a friend and then sent it back to him. So even though it's not good form to do this, what I want to do is go to Wikipedia, and it's sourced, and we'll go to the sources below. And I want to read to you, and I did this last night, the background of how the original anti-fascista action. Notice this little flag over here. You see this flag in the corner? Look familiar? Yeah, that's what's... See it? That's the symbols they still use today. That's the group that this is modeled after. Now, she wanted to make it seem as if I was a terrible person. What's it showing? Oops, one second. She wanted to make it seem as if I was a terrible person because this was a group of Jews that were fighting Nazis. That's how they were formed. That is not how they were formed. They were formed as a branch of Stalinists that were out to fight capitalism. So I'm just going to read through the background here of them. Now, clearly, because she brought this up at the end of the debate, I wasn't able to bring up this facts. But I knew it, and I mentioned all throughout the debate that they defined fascism as capitalism, and that's what they were fighting against, and that they were largely responsible for the rise of the Nazis because they were such a heinous group. She thinks that because we can't talk about that because seemingly they fought the Nazis. Well, yeah, only after they were allied with the Nazis, as I will show you. So, background. In the late 20s to early 30s, saw rising tensions between three groups. The Communist Party of Germany, which is the KPD. So remember that. The KPD are the Communist of Germany. The Nazi Party, and a coalition of governing parties, mainly social democrats and liberals on the other side. So you see, you got the communists, the extreme left, you got the Nazis and their extremism, and then you have the liberals in the center. That was your center. Okay? Berlin in particular was the site of regular and violent clashes. Both the communists and the Nazis explicitly sought to overthrow the liberal democracy of the Weimar Republic, while the social democrats and liberals defended the republic and its constitution. All three factions organized paramilitary groups. So you get that? You got the Nazis and the communists, which are Antifa. That's the group that becomes Antifa. You got them fighting the actual government of Germany, the social democrats. That's what's going on. Okay? Now, let's continue and see what happens. Remember, the KPD are the communists. That's important to remember. Under the leadership of Ernest Thälmann, the KPD became a Stalinist party that was fiercely loyal to the Soviet government. Since 1928, the KPD was largely controlled and funded by the Soviet government through the Comintern. Up until 1928, the KPD pursued a united front policy of working with other working class and socialist parties to combat fascism. It was in this period that the Democratic Party of Germany and its main adversary, the KPD, adopted the position that the SPD was the main fascist party in Germany. Now let me repeat that. There are Nazis, there are communists, and then there are social democrats. The communists, the anti-fascist, declared that the most fascist group wasn't Hitler. It wasn't the Nazis. It was the social democrats. Why? Because they were capitalists. So this group, Antifa, that's founded on fighting the Nazis, well, that's not really how it was founded, was it? It was founded on fighting regular social democrats that were capitalist. Now, why am I talking about this? Last night someone said, well, the history of this is kind of boring. Well, sure, the history of it's boring. I get that. But remember what her point was at the end of that debate. How horrible I was. These were just Jewish people in the original anti-fascista action. Just Jews that were fighting against the evil Nazis. And how dare I blame the victim? Nowhere does this say that it was exclusively Jewish people. And this group was actually working with the Nazis to attack the Social Democrats, which is exactly what I said. Now, let's finish up here real quick. This was based on the theory of social fascism that had been proclaimed by Joseph Stalin, and that was supported by the Comintern during the late 20s and early 30s, which held that social democracy was a variant of fascism. Consequently, the KPD, which became Antifa and was the Communist Party, held that it was, quote, the only anti-fascist party in Germany, and stated that, quote, fighting fascism means fighting the SPD, the Social Democrats, just as much as it means fighting Hitler and the parties of ruining. Do you get that? Does that sound familiar? That's exactly how Antifa's operating today. Everyone we don't like likes a fascist. So they like to rewrite history and say, oh, they were founded as a result of Hitler and they were just fighting Hitler. That's not true. They're saying at the time, oh, Hitler's not the big deal. It's these Social Democrats. Don't believe me? Let's keep reading. In the usage of the Soviet Union, the Comintern and its affiliated policies, including the KPT, the epithet of fascist was used from the 20s to, quote, describe capitalist society in general and virtually any anti-Soviet or anti-Stalinist activity or opinion. Sound familiar? If you're anti-communist, then you're a fascist. If you're a capitalist, then you're a fascist. This is just a communist organization. She talks about, oh, it's terrible to claim like an Antifa to the KKK because look at how many people the KKK's killed. How many people did Stalin's ideals kill? Oh, 50 million? This is a group that was founded as the paramilitary wing in Germany of embracing Stalin's ideas. The term anti-fascist became ubiquitous in Soviet, Comintern, and KPD usage, where it became synonymous with the party line. In KPD and Soviet Union, fascism was primarily viewed as the final stage of capitalism, rather than a specific group or movement such as the Italian fascists or the German Nazis. And based on its theory, the term was applied very broadly. You see, it was about hating capitalism, not about hating Nazis, not about hating Mussolini. The Red Front Fighters League, the KPD's paramilitary and propaganda organization, had been formed in 1924 and was often involved in violent clashes with the police. Sound familiar? Just like Antifa of today. In 1929, the Red Front was banned as extremist, by the governing Social Democrats after rallies escalated in Malfertig in Berlin, where 33 people were killed and many injured in confrontation between police and protesters. Sound familiar? Like the 40 plus that have died in the riots so far this year. May 1st, 1929 was the bloodiest in German history. In 1930, the KPD established its de facto successor, the Kampfront gegen den Faschismus, fighting alliance against fascism. In late 1931, the Red Mass Self-Defense Units were formed by Kampfront members as autonomous and loosely organized structures under the leadership of, but outside the formal organization of the KPD as part of the party's United Front policy to work with other working class groups to defeat fascisms. The KPD viewed the Nazi Party ambiguously during the 30s. On one hand, the KPD considered the Nazis to be one of the most fascist parties, albeit lesser than the Social Democrats. On the other hand, the KPD sought to appeal to the left wing of the Nazi movement by using nationalist slogans. The KPD sometimes cooperated with the Nazis in attacking the Social Democrats. In 1931, the KPD had united with the Nazis, who they referred to as the Working People's Comrades, in an unsuccessful attempt to bring down the SPD government of Prussia. The formation of anti-fascista action in 1932 indicated a shift away from the period policies as fascism was recognized as a more serious threat, leading up to the 34-35 adoption of the Popular Front policy of anti-fascist union with non-communist groups. In October 31, a coalition of right-wing and far-right parties had summoned the Hasbro Front that opposed the government's Center Party. In response, the SPD and affiliated groups had established the Iron Front. Anti-fascist action was formed to counter the Social Democrats' establishment of the Iron Front, which the KPD regarded as a social fascist terrorist organization. Now, boring, I get it. So I'm losing viewers, I get that. The point is, do you see how she virtue signaled? Oh, these were just Jews that were fighting Nazis. That's not true. In all of my reading, she claims, all of my reading of Antifa, I've never heard this. Apparently she didn't check Wikipedia? Don't let them get my blood pressure up. I'm always this excitable. But yeah, I should be more calm. You're right. That's Antifa. That's the group right there. Now, what do you say when everything she said, she is the person that I was debating earlier, which you go back and watch the beginning of this video or go to my YouTube channel and watch it. This is the end of a 2-hour debate I had with a woman by the name of Demon Mama, who thinks that Antifa is not a terrorist organization. So yeah, it's not arguing in good faith. She's just either factually wrong about things, or she's intentionally misleading. That's what it is. It's one thing to be factually wrong. Like, picture that I said this. Let's say that you looked at me and you were like, actually wrong. Did you know that it was actually the Democrats that were the party of the KKK? And let's assume I was a Democrat and said, not only is that wrong, not only are you just wrong, how dare you slander people like that? How dare you victim shame? It was the Democrats that were the victims of the KKK. How dare you? And then you look up and it's like, oh, not only are you wrong, Rob, but you got in a moral high horse and accused people of immorality when you're just 100% factually wrong. What was I looking at on Wiki? I was looking at in the Wikipedia Anti-Fascista Action. That's the original Antifa group. It was out of Germany. It started as a Stalinist group in the late 20s before they called themselves like the Red Front. They started as a militant wing against the Social Democrats in Germany. They united with the Nazis in Germany to fight the Social Democrats. Only after it was obvious that the Nazi party was gaining power did they primarily start to focus and fight against Nazism. The original Antifa, they said they were anti-fascist and they defined fascism as capitalism. That's what I was reading from the wiki. Solely Q says, even if Antifa is a terror group, I don't think they present the biggest danger in the country. Well, Black Lives Matter does more than Antifa. And here's why. Because, for example, let's take the KKK. Now, I know Christopher Wray and a bunch of other scumbags at the FBI that engaged in a coup against Trump are still trying to drum up white supremacy. White supremacy is the big problem. That's because anytime a white person kills a person of color, they want to try to liken it, do everything they can to say it's a hate crime. Even though we can see that an individual black person is 47 times more likely to commit a violent crime against a white person, somehow that's always deemed, that's never a hate crime, that's never terrorism. But when it's the other way, oh yes, that's white supremacy and terrorism. The difference is this. White supremacy is evil. It's vile. I'm disgusted by it. I've routinely argued with people that try to come on and say, well, we need white nationalism and stuff like that. Argue against it all the time. I hate identity politics. I hate racial politics, regardless of what race you're favoring. Racial supremacy politics, right? But no one takes the KKK seriously. No one takes the neo-Nazis seriously. That doesn't mean they can't do harm. If they murder someone, they murder someone. But they have no institutional power at all. That's not true of Antifa and Black Lives Matter. They have immense institutional power to the fact where they could constantly riot in Portland and the local authorities in Portland let them out every night. That's what makes them so dangerous. That's what makes left-wing extremism the most dangerous body in the country today. Because they have people in positions of power that are defending or actively working with them. That does not exist with right-wing extremists. BLM has no power. They're unable to get any police conviction. They just caused $2 billion worth of damage, and they're still considered immensely popular when it comes to corporations, the mainstream media, politicians, academia, the entertainment industry, Silicon Valley. They're so powerful that they tried to kill a guy in Kenosha named Rittenhouse. Rittenhouse fought back, and he's on trial in jail as we speak today for first-degree murder, when all the video evidence clearly shows that it was armed people attacking him that he was defending himself for. Jake Gardner, who was attacked by Black Lives Matter people that were rioting and damaging his building and had him in a headlock. When he shot in self-defense, the Black Lives Matter people then threatened the prosecutor, who then charged Jake Gardner with manslaughter. Then he killed himself. Soleil Q cites something from the FBI that says, right-wing extremists killed 329 since 1994. Antifa kills none. Well, it depends on how you look at it. First off, we know 43 people have died this year alone in the Black Lives Matter Antifa riots. It might be more than that by now, for all we know. We'll see what happens tonight in Louisville. Yeah? Second, why is it only deaths that matter? Can you show me examples of right-wing extremism causing $2 billion worth of damage, destroying untold amounts of lives by burning down predominantly inner-city black neighborhoods? Can you show me that? Third, I already articulated this in the debate and in my summary here, that the way the FBI calculates these statistics are incredibly misleading. For example, if a white nationalist group in prison kills a person of color, they consider that right-wing terrorism. But if a black nationalist group kills a white person in prison, they do not consider that black terrorism. The label terrorism is just, like, I understand, and I use that argument specifically to show that this organization is bad and is used to intimidating people to achieve political ends, right? But when we're talking about actual murders and groups that actual murder, we can see that the FBI and other political groups like to put these labels and change definitions around so that they can make some kind of point. You can say whatever you want about right-wing group this, left-wing group that. The truth is, we know, if you're going to say it's radical white people that are responsible for more deaths, 329 that says since 1994. Again, I go back to the same FBI says that an individual black person is 47 times more likely to commit violence against a white person than vice versa. Just because we don't call it terrorism, we're supposed to be like, oh, white people are the problem. That's the real problem. How did I get that $2 billion? That was the information that was shared. I forget the organization that came out here recently and said that the estimate of the damage so far in the riot since the death of George Floyd's been $2 billion. Oklahoma City bombing is pretty expensive. Yeah, so was 9/11. Isn't it funny, too, that most of these FBI statistics that talk about how, oh, right-wing terrorism is the worst, white nationalist terrorism is the worst, when we actually look, they always start, for some reason, they always start in, like, January 2002. I wonder why. Why do they skip past September 2001? I wonder why they skip by that. Did anything happen then? Oh, that's right. Do I think the FBI is helping blacks? No, I think the FBI was engaged in a coup against Donald Trump. They're part of a deep state establishment that seeks to destroy this country, and one of the easiest ways to do that is to destroy the middle and working class. And so they are aligning with groups like Black Lives Matter and Antifa because they know that that's one of the best ways that they can help destabilize this country by encouraging violent riots to make people not feel safe. That then will embrace needing the government to do something, embrace voting for people like Joe Biden. That's what I think the FBI is doing. I agree with you. The FBI and its alignment with the mainstream media and with politicians like Joe Biden, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, yeah, they don't care about black people at all. That's what I've been telling my friends that identify with Black Lives Matter. They don't care about you. They're embracing the riots right now. They're embracing the message of Black Lives Matter right now because they think that that makes Donald Trump look bad. As soon as the polling started to show, oh, wait, defending these riots isn't helping us. Then all of a sudden you saw Pelosi and Biden and these other groups come out and say, oh, the rioting's wrong. No, we shouldn't do the rioting. And that's the truth. When Joe Biden gets elected, he ain't going to do squat for the black community. Neither is Christopher Wray or the FBI. They're not going to do anything. They're just using Black Lives Matter, that is a violent communist organization, the people that are running it. They're using it to achieve power. Once they get that power, they don't care about Black Lives Matter. They'll throw them under the bus. Well, I certainly have my reservations about how the FBI, when we see a group of Trump supporters or primarily Trump supporters in a country music festival in the biggest mass shooting in the history of the United States, the FBI seemingly, we don't know. We don't know what happened. No clue. I don't think BLM or Antifa are an actual threat for us. I have bills piling up. We have COVID-19. Do you think that the hundreds of thousands of people marching for Antifa and Black Lives Matter are helping with those bills piling up or to stop COVID? Right, political accounts right there with me. So the point is, Antifa is a terrorist organization. What makes them so dangerous is that they are ignored, supported, or deflected for by people in positions of institutional power. I think that I quite clearly made the case in this debate. I think that if you see Demon Mama, who was my debate opponent, or the people that were in Dylan's chat, you could see just how dangerous they are. Because she wasn't, but the chat was labeling me a Nazi and a fascist. She labeled people, you're potentially a fascist or a hyper-nationalist, which is a big step towards fascism, if you think America is the greatest country in the world, if you have a lot of American flags, if you're against the teachers' unions, if you're anti-communist. That's who these people are. They totally feel vindicated in using violence or deflecting for violence if it embraces their Marxist ideals. That's what makes them so dangerous. This ideology has totally overtaken academia, and it's going to get worse and worse. You have people on here saying, well, I'm just not that worried about it. That's because the mob hasn't come for them yet. As long as the mob's attacking people that you don't like, then you're like, I don't see the problem with this. I don't think it's a big threat. But as soon as it comes for you, all of a sudden you'll be like, oh, this is terrible. So, all right. So here's what I'm going to do. I think I'm going to head out for now. This is... It's tough. I'm going to have a rough night. I don't know if I'll be doing a video tomorrow or not. We'll see. But it's my last day at work. I do home health care. Tomorrow's my last day, actually. I'm here for the night. And I've spent my time primarily over the last 9 years, half of my life with one person. So I want to go enjoy my time with them tonight. So I'm going to be heading out. I just wanted to do a little summary there you saw at the end. But I hope you people like the debate. I'll be doing more debates probably in the future. I'm going to do things like have a timer next time I'm at the debate. And I'm going to take you all's advice and try to act more calm and not give in to the insanity that happens on the other side. So thank you so much. Even those that disagreed, Soul Q, anyone else that disagreed with me, you're more than welcome to be here. As you can see, I try to get to the comments. I hope I didn't treat you in a manner you thought was unfitting, even if we disagree. So I don't know if this... Foucault Deed is talking to me or not, but if you can't understand my language, it's English. But anyways, thank you so much. Also, special shout out to Let's Be Frank on YouTube, who I saw donated. And am I not getting YouTube comments now? Probably not. YouTube audience, sometimes my restream, it just stops giving me comments from YouTube, and then I don't realize it. I'm like, wait a minute, let me check real quick to see if I missed anything on YouTube. If anyone was chatting. My restream. Yeah, sorry to all you on YouTube. You guys were all talking to me, and I kind of, it wasn't showing up on Restream, but yeah. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you especially to Let's Be Frank, who donated $50. Donations are always accepted, especially since I'll be moving on from this job. So any financial donations are appreciated, and the more you donate, the more I'll be able to have time to do videos, debates, collaborations, and things like that. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed the debate. As always, have a good one.